Dr. Green, I'm relying entirely on you for my pregnancy preparation and the whole gestation process. The woman with the exquisitely made-up face spoke urgently. You will help me give birth to a healthy baby smoothly, won't you? Grace Green smiled faintly. Please rest assured. From conception to delivery, I will monitor you closely and take good care of you. You are in good health, so as long as you cooperate, you should have no problem having a smooth delivery. That's good. I'm counting on you then. Don't let me down. We signed a contract after all. Don't worry. The woman nodded with satisfaction and said in high spirits, My husband has wanted a child for a long time, but I was afraid of ruining my figure before. I'll call him right now to tell him the news. Hello, Ethan. I've finished chatting with the doctor and the contract is signed. We can start preparing for pregnancy in the next few days. The name Ethan made Grace's heart tremble, and she couldn't help but stare at the woman. Her husband's name was also Ethan. After the woman hung up, Grace asked, her voice trembling slightly, May I ask your husband's full name? The woman's expression immediately turned arrogant, her eyes unable to hide her smugness. Ethan Blackwood, the CEO of Blackwood International. Clang, the fountain pen in Grace's hand dropped to the floor. It really was her husband. But why was this woman calling him husband so naturally? They were even planning to have a child. What on earth was going on? Seeing Grace looking so lost and soulless, the woman's expression turned cold and mocking. Let me tell you, don't get any ideas about my husband. We've been together for a year. We are very much in love. A woman like you doesn't stand a chance. After saying that, the woman grabbed her bag and left. Grace was left alone, feeling cold to her bones. A year. She had been married to Ethan Blackwood for exactly 1 year as well. That meant from the moment they got married, Ethan had another woman on the side. No wonder he never touched her and rarely came home. It wasn't because he was busy with work, nor was it because of the argument on their wedding night. It was because he had a woman outside. Grace squeezed her eyes shut, using every ounce of her strength to calm herself down. She pulled up the woman's file on her computer, Sharon Summers. Grace noted down the woman's name, address, and phone number, then restrained herself and sent a text message to Ethan. Come back tonight. I have something important to discuss with you. She waited for a full 30 minutes before a reply came. No time. Too cold, indifferent words. Grace clenched her teeth. It was always like this. No time, so he wouldn't come home even once a month. She forcefully typed a name into her phone. Sharon Summers. This time, Ethan's call came almost immediately. How did you know? His tone was full of accusation. Grace felt a bitter, acidic pain in her heart. What? You dare to do it, but you're afraid of me knowing. Ethan, since you have no feelings for me, why did you chase me and marry me in the first place? Faced with Grace's painful question, Ethan didn't answer at all. He only said, Grace, I'm warning you. Stay away from Sharon. If you dare to do anything to hurt her, I will never forgive you. The pain in Grace's heart intensified, as if an invisible hand was strangling it, stopping it from beating. Ethan Blackwood, how do you manage to be so self-righteous while betraying me? Grace shouted. Have you ever considered me your wife? There was silence on the other end for a long while. Grace closed her eyes. Just as she was about to speak, she heard Ethan's cold, heartless voice. Grace, if you're dissatisfied, then we can just get a divorce. Just get a divorce. How lightly he said those words. Ethan, what do you take our marriage for? Was it child's play? Was the year of marriage and the year of dating all just a joke? It is nothing. That was Ethan's answer. No tenderness, no reluctance. Grace was in so much pain she couldn't speak. She collapsed weakly into her chair, her body ice cold. So do we divorce, Grace? On the other end of the phone, Ethan's voice remained as cool as ice. Grace did not answer Ethan. Divorce? She couldn't bear it. But if she didn't divorce, she couldn't swallow this insult. She didn't know what to do. The matter simply dragged on meaninglessly. A week later, Sharon Summers came to the hospital again. She came for a pregnancy checkup. Facing her again, Grace couldn't bring herself to smile, but professional ethics forced her to remain polite. She explained, you weren't pregnant during the last checkup. It's only been 7 days. Even if you have conceived, it won't show up yet. Sharon said unhappily, why can't it show up? I paid your hospital so much money, and you can't even check something as simple as pregnancy. Grace said stiffly, in 7 days, no matter which hospital you go to, it won't show up. We can only speculate. Have you felt any abnormalities in your body recently? Sharon seemed to think of something, and her expression suddenly became shy. What kind of abnormalities? My husband and I went a bit overboard these past few days, and I've been feeling a bit uncomfortable. Does that count? Grace's face turned pale, and she gripped her pen tightly. Sharon scrutinized Grace's ugly expression, her eyes becoming even more triumphant. After hearing that I'm willing to have a baby, my husband was so happy. He gave me a car and a house, and he specifically leaves work early every night to keep me company. Grace, her face white, couldn't help but say, "Do you have any other exams to do? If not, please leave. I have other patients waiting." Sharon, having achieved her goal, left with satisfaction. Grace lay on her desk, swallowing her pain. She wasn't in good shape, so she asked the hospital director for leave and got off work early. Feeling irritable, Grace drove aimlessly around the streets. Unknowingly, she drove to the building of Ethan's company. After parking for a while, Grace let out a self-deprecating laugh and prepared to leave. But just then, she saw Ethan walking out of the company with his arm around Sharon. Sharon was hugging Ethan's waist tightly, the two of them almost glued together as they walked toward the sedan at the entrance. Grace gritted her teeth, unable to bear it anymore. She pushed open the car door, ready to go down, catch them in the act, and confront them face to face. Bang! A truck suddenly crashed into the rear of Grace's car. With a loud boom, Grace's car lost control and slid forward, crashing headfirst into the outer wall of Ethan's company. The glass on the wall and the car's windshield shattered instantly. Grace was thrown violently by the impact and then yanked back by the seatbelt. Her forehead hit the steering wheel, and her arm flared with pain. "There's been a car accident," someone shouted. Grace slumped in her seat, dizzy and in pain all over. Through the shattered window, Grace's eyes met Ethan's. Grace's heart constricted. In that instant, she forgot the physical pain and murmured, "Ethan?" Ethan glanced at the blood-covered Grace twice, then expressionlessly looked away. "Hey, that looks like my doctor, Grace Green," Sharon said. "Why did she get into an accident?" "Ethan, quickly call 911. Ethan opened the car door and ushered Sharon inside. "She's irrelevant. Don't waste time." "But..." Slam! Ethan closed the car door. Without glancing again at Grace, who was still trapped in the car, he walked around to the other side and got in. The engine roared, and Ethan drove away with Sharon. He left his wife, who had just been in a serious car accident, on the side of the road to die. Grace closed her eyes, feeling it was utterly ridiculous. "How are you? Are you okay?" The truck driver ran over. Seeing Grace covered in blood, his face turned pale with fright. "I'll call an ambulance right now." Grace slowly opened her eyes. Her right hand had been pierced by a shard of glass, but ignoring the pain, she reached out and grabbed the phone that had fallen into the cup holder. Blood flowed continuously from her wound, running down her fingertips onto the screen. Wiping the blood off the screen, Grace typed a message with trembling hands. "Ethan Blackwood, I agree. Let's get a divorce." After sending the text message, Grace fainted. When she woke up, she was in the hospital where she worked. The young nurse guarding her bedside knew her well. Seeing her wake up, the nurse proactively explained her condition. Mild concussion, glass puncture in the right arm, 2 cracked ribs, and countless scrapes and glass cuts. "Sigh, how did you get hurt like this?" The nurse looked at Grace with pity. Grace felt nothing regarding these results. She just nodded calmly. The nurse added, "All right, I've said what I needed to say. I'll go call Dr. Stone. You slept through the night after surgery yesterday, and he didn't leave your side for a moment." After speaking, the nurse winked ambiguously at Grace. Although Grace had said she was married, since her husband never appeared, everyone tacitly assumed that Grace was lying about being married. Xander Stone arrived quickly. Upon entering, he asked how Grace was feeling. "I'm fine," Grace said politely. "You don't need to worry." Xander pulled up a chair and sat by Grace's bed, his eyes full of undisguised affection. "When I saw you brought in covered in blood yesterday, I was so scared I almost fainted. In that moment, I realized how important you are to me." Grace avoided his gaze and whispered, "I'm sorry, I really am married." Xander smiled. "It's okay, I'm just telling you I like you. I'm not demanding you respond. No matter what, we are colleagues. Rest well, I have work to do." Grace stared into space for a moment, then took her phone from the nightstand to check her messages. Ethan had not replied to the divorce text she sent. Grace didn't know what he meant by this. She waited for 2 full days, but there was still no reply. Grace had to send it again. When do you have time? Let's go handle the divorce procedures. Still no answer. Grace was getting angry. He was the one cheating, he was the one who proposed divorce, and now he was the one playing dead and not replying. What exactly did he mean? She called Ethan directly. But the person who answered the phone was Sharon. Grace Green. Sharon looked at the caller ID and asked uncertainly, "Is this the Grace from the hospital?" Grace's heart tightened. She said hoarsely, "Where is Ethan? Put him on the phone." "My husband is taking a shower, he's busy," Sharon said sarcastically. Grace let out a laugh. "Sorry, I haven't told you before, but I am Ethan Blackwood's legal wife. You call him your husband, but I wonder what kind of wife you count as?" "You're talking nonsense." "Whether I'm talking nonsense or not, don't you know the truth yourself? Do you and Ethan have a marriage certificate?" Sharon went quiet immediately. A few seconds later, she said stubbornly, "So what if you have a certificate? He is with me every day, which proves he doesn't care about you at all." Grace paused for a moment, keeping her voice steady. "Yes, that's why I proposed a divorce. Let's see if he agrees." "Of course he agrees." Hearing the mention of divorce, Sharon's expression changed. Holding the phone, she walked toward the bathroom. "Ethan, this woman is calling you, claiming to be your wife. Did you really lie to me? Are you already married?" There was silence on the other end for several seconds before Ethan's voice sounded. "Are you talking about that woman who holds the title in name only? She's not worth mentioning." "Not worth mentioning?" Grace closed her eyes. Sharon said aggrievedly, "But she even called me a mistress. She scolded you?" Ethan's voice betrayed no emotion. "Yes, she scolded me and threatened me, saying I would die a horrible death and never be able to have children." Sharon even faked a crying tone, acting incredibly wronged. Grace found it ridiculous. The sound of wind came through the phone as Ethan took it. "Grace!" His voice was icy. "Did I warn you not to disturb Sharon? Why didn't you reply to my message?" Grace asked him in return. Ethan didn't answer. Grace couldn't understand his silence. "Ethan, are you going to divorce me or not?" Ethan said coldly, "Do you want to leave that badly?" Grace laughed in anger. "You cheated and you brought up the divorce. Now I'm just agreeing to your terms." "Then I won't divorce," Ethan said without emotion. Grace was stunned. "Ethan, what exactly do you mean?" "No meaning. I just don't want you to have it easy," Ethan said. "I want you to live in pain every single day from now on." Grace paused and after a long while said, "Why? What exactly did I?" Beep beep, the call was hung up directly. Grace stared blankly at her phone, unable to figure it out. Was it just because of one argument that Ethan held a grudge until now? Grace bit her lip. Her stubbornness flared up. She was now dead set on divorcing Ethan. She quickly contacted a lawyer, drafted a divorce agreement, signed it, and mailed it to Ethan. But there was still no response. 3 days later, an unwelcome guest arrived in Grace's hospital room. Sharon. Grace's face darkened. "What are you doing here?" Sharon glanced at Grace and threw a document onto Grace's face. "This is the work contract we signed. It was agreed that you would ensure I get pregnant and deliver safely. If you breach the contract, the penalty is $10 million. Grace said calmly, "But the premise is that you have to be able to get pregnant. I only guarantee your physical condition during the preparation and—" "I'm pregnant," Sharon said proudly. "Miss Green, now it's time for you to fulfill your obligations. I want a prenatal checkup right now. Arrange it for me immediately." Grace froze. "You're pregnant?" Sharon looked triumphant. "Yes, Grace. Even if you are Ethan's wife, so what? In the future, you still have to bow and scrape before me." Grace gritted her teeth. Sharon's expression became even more arrogant as she slowly walked closer, looking down at Grace. "If you divorce Ethan, I will be the complete winner. If you don't divorce, then at least for the next few months of my pregnancy, you will have to hold the title of the legal wife while being a dog I can order around." After speaking, she couldn't help but laugh, mocking sharply, "Grace, your life is truly a joke." Grace closed her eyes. "Get out," Sharon said arrogantly. "Miss Green, be polite to me. I am your—" "I said get out." Grace suddenly grabbed the flower vase from the bedside table and smashed it heavily onto the floor. The vase shattered a full meter away from Sharon. Sharon glanced at the shards of the vase, rolled her eyes, and suddenly threw herself onto her knees toward the shattered glass. "Ah!" she screamed piercingly. Help save me. The nurse outside rushed in quickly. What happened? Save me. Sharon reached out to the nurse. She started crying on cue, her face instantly covered in pitiful tears. I was pushed. The shards pierced my knees. Sharon was wearing a dress, so her bloody knees were visible at a glance. The wounds looked terrifying. Oh my God, I'll go call the doctor. Soon, not just the doctor but even the hospital director rushed over to examine the wounds on Sharon's knees. Sharon was helped onto the sofa, covering her face and sobbing quietly. What happened? The director asked sternly. The nurse hurriedly said, This lady said Dr. Green pushed her into the vase shards. The director's face changed and he immediately questioned Grace. What is wrong with you? Why did you push a patient? Lying in bed, Grace said calmly, Look at my current condition. Could I possibly push her? Are you implying I knelt down myself? Sharon cried. Dr. Green, how could you be like this? I can't explain this clearly myself. I better let my husband bring his lawyer to talk. The word lawyer frightened the director. He immediately said, No, we can discuss this. It's not a big deal. I'll have Dr. Green apologize to you right now. After saying that, the director immediately scolded Grace, telling her to apologize properly to the patient. Grace said, Why should I apologize for something I didn't do? If she wants to contact her husband to bring a lawyer, fine. I'll call my husband over too, and we'll see who ends up embarrassed. Sharon's face changed slightly. After all, she was the real mistress. If Ethan came and things blew up, the ones embarrassed would naturally only be her and Ethan. You are going too far, Sharon started crying again. I'm going to expose you all, Sharon limped up, struggling to walk out. The director quickly stopped her, saying to Grace, Dr. Green, apologize quickly, it's just a sorry. Will it kill you? Grace bit her lip and refused to speak. This is bullying, Sharon pretended to shake off the director. When he pulled her, she conveniently fell to the floor, and her knees, which had just stopped bleeding, began to bleed again. Miss Summers, you can't move around in your condition, nurse, quick. In the corridor, heavy footsteps suddenly sounded. The sound wasn't loud, but inexplicably it made everyone in the room pause, subconsciously stopping their conversation. The footsteps got closer. Grace's heart tightened. She knew those were Ethan's footsteps. A second later, Ethan appeared at the door. Sharon was still sitting on the floor. Seeing Ethan, she immediately cried miserably, Ethan? Ethan glanced at her, then looked up, staring coldly at Grace across half the room. What did you do? Grace wanted to ask him why he wouldn't divorce, but she couldn't bear to expose his affair in front of everyone. I didn't do anything, Grace said. Mr. Blackwood, why don't you ask yourself and Sharon Summers what you have done? Afraid that her status as a mistress would be exposed, Sharon preemptively struck. Dr. Green, what do you mean? We are husband and wife, whatever we do is proper. But what about you? Behind everyone's back, you contacted my husband privately, attempted to seduce him, failed, and then took your anger out on me by pushing me into glass shards. So that was it. People in the ward gasped, but they couldn't believe their colleague, whom they had known for so long, could be this kind of person. Is there some misunderstanding? What misunderstanding could there be? Sharon said. Doesn't she always tell you she's married, but her husband is busy and never shows up? The expressions of the people in the room changed slightly. It was indeed true. That's because she has been pestering my husband. Grace found it hilarious. Miss Summers, do you want me to take out the marriage certificate for me and Ethan and show it to you properly? Sharon said, Take it out, then take it out to prove yourself, fine. Since they were being so ruthless, she didn't need to be soft-hearted. Grace threw off the blanket, actually intending to get out of bed. Grace, Ethan spoke up. Can you stop pretending? Grace froze. Ethan stared straight at her, his eyes devoid of emotion. Sharon is carrying my child, she is my wife, but you are nothing. This sentence practically confirmed that Grace was a woman pestering Ethan and trying to wreck a marriage. Ethan walked past Sharon and the director, straight up to Grace. Apologize to Sharon, and I won't pursue this matter, he said coldly. Otherwise, I will level this hospital. The director panicked and quickly said, Grace, apologize quickly, thinking of her innocent colleagues in the hospital. Grace endured the humiliation and said, I'm sorry. However, Ethan said, you made Sharon kneel on glass shards, so you should also apologize on your knees. Ethan Blackwood, don't push me too far, Grace was furious. I've already apologized, Ethan, however, said, Don't make me repeat myself. Grace looked up, staring directly into Ethan's eyes. So what if you say it twice? Are you going to kill me? Ethan leaned down, bending over to get close to Grace, the distance between them shrinking. Grace looked at this handsome face she had loved for 2 years, and her heart still traitorously skipped a beat. Killing you would be too easy. The words from Ethan's mouth only brought heartache to Grace. I have plenty of ways to make you suffer more than death. If you want to test me, just bring it on. Grace, Xander rushed in at that moment. I heard something happened. As soon as he entered the room, he saw Ethan and Grace so close together and blurted out, "What are you doing?" Stay away from Grace. Xander ran in 2 steps, inserting himself between the two, protecting Grace behind him. Ethan scanned Xander and Grace and suddenly laughed. Grace was baffled. What are you laughing at? Ethan didn't answer. Suddenly, he reached out and roughly grabbed Grace, pulling her up. Grace stumbled, practically being dragged by Ethan to the wall. Let go, Grace. Ethan leaned down, whispering into her ear with chilling malice, "You want a divorce. Fine. Tomorrow night, I'll be waiting for you at home." After speaking, he let go. Grace lost her balance and fell to her knees on the floor with a thud. Grace, Xander immediately ran over to help her up. Ethan glanced at the two of them with an unreadable expression, but everyone in the room could clearly feel a chill radiating from him. Ethan, Sharon suddenly spoke up. My stomach hurts. Ethan strode towards her with his long legs, swept Sharon up into his arms. I'll take you for a checkup. Sharon nodded. Once they were far enough away, she whispered, Ethan, what did you say to Miss Green just now? You seem very unhappy. Ethan remained expressionless. I didn't say anything. Arriving at the OB-GYN department, he placed Sharon in the examination room, instructed the doctor to check carefully, and left immediately after giving his orders. Lying on the examination chair alone, Sharon dug her nails into her palms. It had been a year. She had spent a whole year of time and effort on Ethan. She absolutely would not allow herself to fail since Grace was an obstacle. She would eliminate her and then possess Ethan completely. The next day, Grace took a second copy of the divorce agreement, discharged herself from the hospital early, and went home. She waited until deep into the night before Ethan opened the door and returned. Grace sat on the sofa without moving. Ethan pushed open the door and walked in with slightly unsteady steps. He slammed the door shut with one hand and loosened his tie with the other. His eyes slightly narrowed as he stared coldly and sharply at Grace. A chill ran down Grace's spine. She felt an inexplicable danger. She placed the divorce agreement on the coffee table and got straight to the point. I've already signed the divorce agreement. I don't want anything of yours. I'm leaving with nothing. You just need to sign. Ethan walked over silently, picked up the document on the table, and flipped through 2 pages. He tore the agreement straight through. Grace got angry. What are you do? Before she could finish, Ethan pressed her down onto the sofa. Ethan, Grace panic-strickenly pressed against Ethan's chest. What do you want to do? Ethan leaned in close, gently sniffing the scent at the side of Grace's neck. We've been married for a year, yet I've never touched you. Ethan spoke hoarsely, his lips brushing against the skin of her neck, tantalizingly close. Grace tensed up in bewilderment, her heart racing nervously. I'm missing out too much. This sentence was like cold water, splashing awake the throbbing in Grace's heart. Ethan, stop, don't touch my dress. When she woke up, it was already noon the next day. Grace was the only one left in the room. Ethan was nowhere to be seen. Grace got up, showered, and changed clothes. Coming out, she picked up a fragment of the agreement from the floor, looked at it for a few seconds, and crumpled it into a ball. If he wouldn't divorce, then fine. It didn't affect her anyway. But that child in Sharon's belly would forever be an illegitimate child meant for the shadows. Grace looked around the new house she had lived in for a year and decided to move out. She started packing her luggage. Just as she had packed the most important things, her phone rang urgently. It was Xander. Grace, a pregnant woman you were in charge of a while ago, suddenly fell critically ill. You know her condition best at the hospital. Come back quickly. Okay. Right away, Grace immediately stuffed her passport and other items lying on the bed into her bag, then hurriedly left the apartment, forgetting her phone on the bedside table. Not long after she left, the apartment door clicked open. Ethan had returned. He was carrying a food container. Grace was not in the living room. Ethan walked towards the bedroom. The closet door in the bedroom was open. The closet, usually full of clothes, had an empty section, clearly cleared out by someone. The bedside table drawer was also open. The important documents and ID cards kept inside were all gone. Ethan stood rooted to the spot. Suddenly, the phone on the bedside table vibrated. Ethan walked over and answered it. Xander's anxious voice came through immediately. "Grace, are you out yet? Do you need me to pick you up?" Ethan remained silent. "Grace," Xander said. "Are you there, Grace?" "What is?" Ethan spoke, his voice low and dark. "Your relationship?" Xander paused, asking guardedly, "Who are you? Why do you have Grace's phone?" Ethan spoke every word with chilling coldness. "I asked, what is your relationship?" Xander retorted angrily, "What does our relationship have to do with you? Who are you to Grace? What right do you have to question her affairs with me?" After saying that, Xander hung up directly. Ethan froze for a second, then violently raised his hand and smashed the phone against the wall. With a crack, it shattered into pieces. Grace took a taxi to the hospital, looked at the pregnant woman's test results, and hurriedly consulted with other doctors. Her right arm wound hadn't healed yet, so she couldn't operate and had to ask other doctors. This busy spell lasted until the next morning. Exhausted, Grace curled up in a chair and fell asleep. Xander came looking for her, found her asleep, took off his coat, and gently covered Grace with it before leaving quietly. Grace slept in a daze. In her grogginess, the clinic door suddenly clicked and someone entered. Grace startled awake from her dream. "Dr. Green?" Sharon walked in triumphantly, holding onto Ethan's arm. Grace sat up. The coat on her slipped off. She caught it unconsciously and clenched it tight. "Oh, that's a man's coat, isn't it?" Sharon laughed. "Very thoughtful. Did that Dr. Stone leave it for you?" Watching the intimate behavior between Ethan and Sharon, Grace felt a sourness in her heart. She tried her best to endure it. "What are you doing here?" Sharon said. "What else could we be doing? A prenatal checkup, of course, and to notify you of something." She cast a charming glance at Ethan. "Ethan, you say it." Ethan said coldly, "I just spoke with your director. Starting today, you are Sharon's exclusive private doctor. You don't need to attend to other patients in the hospital, just take care of her alone." Ethan let go of Sharon and walked to the desk alone. Lowering his rich voice, he said, "Grace, for the next 9 months, I want you to guard Sharon every step of the way. If she loses a single hair, I will chop you up." Just like that, Grace became Sharon's private doctor. The director told Grace to go with Sharon and that she didn't need to come to the hospital for work, just to take care of Sharon every day. Grace didn't want to agree, but even if she resigned from the hospital, she couldn't cancel the contract with Sharon. Breaking it meant a penalty of $10 million. To facilitate caring for Sharon, Grace moved into another large villa owned by Ethan. When she arrived, Ethan wasn't there. However, the place was full of traces of Ethan's life. This should be where he usually lived, but there didn't seem to be many of Sharon's things inside. She found it strange, but before she could think about it deeply, Sharon arrogantly ordered her to make soup. Grace said coldly, "The contract does not require me to be responsible for your meals." Sharon walked up to Grace in her high heels. "It's not required, but if I eat other food and accidentally get poisoned, losing the baby, do you think Ethan will be angry?" She tilted her head, putting on a pretentious, innocent expression. "I heard you have a brother studying abroad, right? Your mom passed away early, your father remarried and had 2 more kids, ignoring you and your brother. So you and your brother have relied on each other since childhood, and you are very close." Grace said alertly, "What do you want?" "It's not what I want, it's what Ethan will do when he gets angry," Sharon threatened. "Grace, recognize your situation clearly. Don't act high and mighty with me, or your brother will get dragged into this, you should know. Ethan will show absolutely no mercy to you." Grace closed her eyes. Just 9 months. She just had to endure it. Grace's arm wound hadn't healed, limiting what she could do. Fortunately, there was a maid in the villa to help, so she managed to make the soup Sharon wanted. But Sharon had just finished half a bowl when she suddenly vomited blood, accompanied by shortness of breath and convulsions. Obviously poisoned. Grace quickly dialed 911. As soon as the ambulance arrived, Sharon was sent to the hospital. Grace stood waiting at the entrance of the emergency room. What exactly happened? She thought of the maid who helped. Could she have poisoned the soup? Grace couldn't have done it, so the only person who handled the soup was that maid, so it must be her. Grace immediately took out her phone. wanting to call the villa to have them detain the maid. But she didn't have the contact number, so she could only call Ethan. But no matter how many times Grace called, Ethan wouldn't pick up. She had to send a text. "Answer my call, something happened to Sharon." Within half a minute of sending the message, Ethan called back. What happened? Grace clearly explained the process of Sharon's poisoning. "So, you have to send someone quickly to catch that maid otherwise." "Grace, do you not use your brain when you lie?" Ethan interrupted her. "I don't have young maids at my house. Auntie Sue and Nanny Liu are both over 40. Grace was stunned. "How is that possible?" Ethan said. "On your first day at my house, you poisoned Sharon." "Grace, you really are vicious." "I didn't." Grace was somewhat flustered. "Trust me. Go ask the others in the villa, and Sharon, she also." Speaking of this, Grace paused. Sharon indeed saw that maid too, but who knew if they were in cahoots? "Grace, why do you never listen to my warnings? Do you hold me in such little regard?" Grace gripped her phone tightly. "Ethan, is it true that no matter what I say now, you won't believe me? Trust you, do you deserve it?" Grace was speechless and closed her eyes. "In that case, why do you still let me take care of Sharon? Aren't you afraid I'll attack her again?" "Then, I will make sure you never have the chance to do it again." Ethan hung up the phone. Before Grace could process the meaning of Ethan's words, two black-clad bodyguards rushed from the other end of the corridor, roughly grabbed Grace's arms, and dragged her away. Grace was taken to the hospital basement. Two men threw her directly onto the dusty and filthy floor. Just as Grace tried to sit up, a man strode forward and unceremoniously stomped on Grace's injured arm. Blood gushed out almost immediately. Grace cried out in a low voice and was forced to lie prone on the ground. "Mr. Blackwood says you are too unappreciative and need to be taught a lesson." After speaking, one of them looked at the other. The other man squatted down, pulled something out from his pocket, and showed it to Grace. It was a blood-stained shard of porcelain. "This is the vase shard Miss Summers knelt on when you pushed her," the man said viciously while pinching the large, sharp piece of porcelain. "Now, we are going to return this thing to you." The foot stepping on Grace's arm moved to her back, pressing down hard on her spine. The crushing pain on her bones left Grace weak all over, completely unable to move. The other person grabbed Grace's arm, ripped off the gauze in a few moves, revealing the wound that hadn't had its stitches removed yet. "What are you doing?" The man tore the stitches on Grace's wound right open. Blood poured out continuously, dripping onto the floor. Right in that flowing blood, the man stuffed that porcelain shard directly into Grace's wound. "This is just a small punishment," the man said as he haphazardly wrapped the gauze back on. The shard rubbed and cut inside the wound. Grace was in so much pain she almost passed out. The gauze was quickly soaked with blood. "If you continue to be disobedient and go against Mr. Blackwood, next time, this shard will be in your brother's stomach." With the gauze tied, the two men stopped and left quickly. Grace was left alone in the basement, gasping for breath as she endured the pain in her arm. Perhaps due to excessive blood loss, she was dizzy and weak, unable to crawl up. But the shard inside the wound had to be removed as soon as possible, or it would get infected. Grace struggled desperately to get up, stumbling out of the basement. Outside was an empty, deserted corridor. Grace walked along the corridor for a long time until she finally saw stairs. She wanted to go up, but after just a few steps, her vision went black and she fainted. When she woke up, Grace was lying in a hospital room. The gauze on her arm had been changed to new ones, but Grace could feel that the porcelain shard was still inside. She wanted to touch the wound when Ethan's voice suddenly sounded. "Awake!" Grace startled and looked towards the sound. Ethan was sitting on the sofa against the wall. Seeing Grace wake up, he put down the file in his hand and walked over slowly. Grace's heart constricted. Thinking of the scene in the basement, she couldn't help feeling angry. What exactly had she done wrong for Ethan to treat her like this? Sharon's child, Ethan stood by Grace's bed, looking down at her coldly, might have problems. Grace gritted her teeth. "What do you mean?" Ethan said. "The heavy metal poison you gave her entered the fetal cells through blood circulation, and that poison damages the kidneys." At this point, Grace didn't want to argue about who administered the poison anymore. She only asked, "So what do you want to do?" Ethan stared at Grace for a few seconds, then slowly leaned down and said ruthlessly, "I want you to give birth to a child to provide a kidney transplant for Sharon's child." "Are you crazy?" Grace couldn't believe it. Ethan straightened up. Vaguely, Grace seemed to hear him say yes, but before she could be sure, the ward door was pushed open by a secretary. "Boss, everything is arranged." Ethan nodded. "Take her away?" "Yes." The secretary nodded and signaled for two familiar bodyguards to enter. They were the two men who had stuffed the porcelain into Grace's arm. No. Grace was terrified, and the wound on her arm began to throb with faint pain. She got out of bed to run. The bodyguards were faster. They intercepted Grace by the waist, firmly restraining her. "Let me go," Grace struggled desperately. "Let go, Grace." Ethan suddenly spoke, his tone low. "Didn't you want to divorce me? Leave me a child and I will let you go." The next day, Grace was taken out of the hospital and locked in a countryside villa. She was sure the shard in her arm hadn't been removed, so she had to endure the pain without anesthesia and pry the porcelain piece out with tweezers. She roughly treated the wound with the everted flesh and waited for her body to heal slowly on its own. Unfortunately, Grace's wound got infected. That night, she developed a high fever that didn't subside for 3 whole days. Her temperature kept rising. The servant taking care of her was worried Grace might die, so she hired an unlicensed countryside doctor who recklessly gave Grace a few shots of antibiotics. Grace's high fever came and went for a whole week before she finally pulled through. Just as she recovered from the fever and her body hadn't fully regained strength, Ethan came. Seeing him now, Grace immediately tensed every muscle in her body, extremely wary. Watching her defensive demeanor, Ethan suddenly laughed. Grace stood up and backed away continuously, creating distance. "Ethan, whatever misunderstanding there is between us, can we talk it out properly?" She pleaded, almost begging. "Stop torturing me like this. Let me go and let yourself go, okay?" Ethan approached in a few steps, grabbed Grace's arm, yanked her up with great force, and threw her onto the bed. He slowly loosened his tie. "Is what's between us a misunderstanding?" Ethan held Grace down. "Everything has been investigated clearly. Grace, you betrayed me and hurt Sharon. You are a two-faced, hypocritical woman. Betrayed you? I didn't." MMPH, Ethan stuffed a handkerchief into Grace's mouth, cutting off whatever she was about to say. "Remember my condition?" He gripped Grace's fragile neck. "Leave me a child and I'll let you go." Grace shook her head, feeling both resistance and terror, almost crying. Grace's arm wound, which had just healed a little, was torn open again in the struggle. Blood flowed out, seeping through the gauze and staining the sheets red. Looking at that splash of red, Ethan couldn't help but soften involuntarily. But Grace was nearly unconscious and couldn't feel it. Afterward, Grace fell straight into a deep sleep. She didn't wake up until the afternoon of the next day. From then on, Ethan came every 2 days. Grace sometimes felt he came to find her just to vent. Half a month later, Grace realized her period, which should have come, was missing. She suspected she was pregnant, so she asked the bodyguard at the door to buy her pregnancy tests. The bodyguard, who usually ignored her completely, actually helped her this time and thoughtfully brought 3 types of tests to prevent errors. Grace tested, and there were 2 lines. She was really pregnant. She slumped onto the toilet, fear creeping in belatedly. Her child would be taken away by Ethan the moment it was born, and she, the mother, would never see it. No, she didn't want this. She couldn't let Ethan know she was pregnant. Vroom, the sound of a car horn rang out from the yard. Ethan was here. Grace hurriedly threw all the pregnancy tests into the toilet and flushed them away. Outside the door, Ethan's footsteps were approaching quickly. Grace panicked and instinctively locked the bathroom door. "Grace," Ethan walked over. "What are you doing in the bathroom?" "Nothing. I heard you ask someone to buy pregnancy tests." Ethan stopped outside the door, his voice low and deep, his mood indiscernible. "Are you pregnant?" "No," Grace denied immediately. "I'm not." Bang, Ethan slapped the door. "Open the door." Grace shrank back. I'm using the toilet. It's not convene." Bang, Ethan didn't give her time for nonsense and kicked the door open directly. At a glance, he saw the torn pregnancy test packaging in the trash can. "Where is the result?" he asked. Grace lowered her lashes. "Threw it away. I'm really not pregnant." "If you're not pregnant, why were you in such a rush to throw away the result?" Ethan approached slowly, leaning down, his gaze sharp. "Grace, are you planning to run away with my child?" Grace's lashes trembled. She knew she couldn't hide it. Even if she didn't admit it now, Ethan could send her directly to the hospital for a checkup, forcing her to admit it. "Ethan!" Grace grabbed the hem of Ethan's shirt. Let me go, I beg you, please. Ethan looked down, his eyes dark. Grace, do you want to leave me that badly? Grace asked in confusion. Don't you already have Sharon? You two have such a good relationship. Don't you want to separate from me? Shut up, Ethan interrupted her roughly. Grace, I'm warning you for the last time. Be good and stay here. Give birth to the child. If you don't listen, not only will I chop you up, I will also cut off your brother's legs and make him beg on the streets abroad. Grace let go of her hand dejectedly and lowered her head in despair. Ethan grabbed her chin, forced it up, and stared into her eyes. Did you hear me? Grace closed her eyes. I heard you. Ethan shook off Grace's chin. You better smarten up, don't keep forcing me to act. Grace turned her face away, thinking of the torture in the basement again. The wound on her arm, which had mostly recovered, began to throb with pain. Clutching her arm, she said hoarsely, I understand. Ethan didn't say anything more. He left the villa. When he appeared again, it was a month later. He came to take Grace for a prenatal checkup. While waiting for the results, Grace couldn't help asking, How is Sharon's child? Ethan said coldly, Her affairs are none of your business. Just worry about your own belly. Grace stopped asking. For the next 6 months, every time there was a checkup, Ethan would come back and take Grace personally. If his face weren't so dark and menacing, Grace would have almost thought he actually cared about her. But that delusional thought passed in a flash. Because she knew Ethan accompanied her to every checkup without fail only to ensure the health of the fetus in her womb, guaranteeing the future kidney transplant surgery. When Grace was almost 8 months pregnant, Sharon arrived. Her belly was flat. It seemed the child had already been born. But without even recovering from birth, she came to find Grace first. She was really determined. What are you doing here? Grace asked alertly, retreating far away to create a safe distance. Sharon smiled coldly and signaled the 2 bodyguards at the door. The bodyguards immediately walked in. I can't wait for your natural delivery, Sharon said. I want the child in your belly right now, Grace panicked. But he's less than 8 months, you'll kill him like this, Sharon smiled indifferently. If this one dies, you can just breed the next one. What's the big deal? Lunatic Grace turned to run, but her belly was too big, she couldn't run at all. She was caught within a few steps and dragged in front of Sharon. Sharon looked Grace's belly up and down. You haven't reached your due date yet. I won't make it hard for you by demanding a natural birth. Let's be direct and do a C-section. Grace was dragged to the small living room on the first floor. Bodyguards pushed a long table over and pressed Grace onto it. No, let me go, Grace struggled with all her might. In the critical situation, she burst out with tremendous strength, making it impossible for the 2 men to pin her down. Grace pushed one away and struggled to run, but Sharon stepped forward and unceremoniously kicked Grace hard on her bulging belly. Ah, Grace cried out in pain, her body going limp instantly as she fell to the floor. Her abdomen contracted violently, agonizingly. A gush of warm wetness rushed out from between her legs. No, she was going into premature labor. Sharon walked over in her high heels, looking very composed. Grace, you're giving birth. She squatted down and smiled. I'm kind, so I'll give you a choice. Do you want to give birth yourself or do you want me to help you? Grace grabbed her tightly. I want to go to the hospital. The baby is premature. He must go into an incubator, or he won't survive. The contractions grew stronger and stronger. Grace shook with pain, uncontrollably gripping Sharon's clothes tightly. Sharon waved her away with disgust. Go to the hospital. What if you run away? I won't. Grace said with difficulty through the pain. Sharon, I swear, I will cooperate fully and give birth in the hospital. This is Ethan's child. I believe you don't want anything to happen to him either. You're right, it is Ethan's child after all. Besides, I'm still waiting to take his kidney to swap with my son's. Sharon said as she picked up her phone. Don't worry, I'll call an ambulance right now. Clutching her belly, Grace nodded strugglingly. The pain was too intense. Within half a minute, cold sweat soaked her entire body, but Sharon suddenly slapped Grace across the face. Weak and powerless, Grace fell to the ground. Sharon immediately stepped on her belly, crushing it cruelly. Do you think I care about you and Ethan's child? She increased the pressure as she spoke, enjoying Grace's painful expression. How is your son's dirty kidney worthy of entering my son's body? I'm not afraid to tell you, my son is perfectly healthy. She stomped hard on Grace's belly, as if trying to trample the innocent child inside to death through the skin. I should have killed you long ago, die. Just die. As she spoke, she repeatedly trampled Grace's stomach. The amniotic fluid drained away, and blood began to flow from between Grace's legs. She lay dying on the floor, her breathing weak, half her life already gone. Sharon, however, looked exhilarated. Tired of stomping, she picked up a vase from the side, weighed it in her hand, and prepared to smash it onto Grace's head. Just then, the sound of a car horn rang out in the courtyard. Grace's dazed consciousness suddenly snapped awake. She struggled to open her eyes, opening and closing her lips, silently shouting, "Ethan!" The bodyguards in the room panicked too. If Ethan found out they treated Grace like this, they would definitely die without a whole corpse. What are you panicking for? Sharon was incredibly calm. Carry her out the back door and dump her somewhere random. If Ethan asks later, just say, Sharon smiled playfully. Say Grace and that Dr. Stone ran away together. Yes. The bodyguards received the order and immediately lifted Grace, running quickly towards the back door. No. Grace moved her finger weakly, gathering all her remaining strength for one desperate struggle. Perhaps the two bodyguards were too anxious. They lost their grip, and Grace rolled onto the ground. In the villa courtyard, the car sound had stopped, and Ethan's footsteps were getting closer. What are you doing? Move faster, Sharon urged, while simultaneously rolling up the rug stained with dripping blood and hiding it. The bodyguards lifted Grace again, kicked open the back door anxiously, and stepped through. Grace wanted to call for help, but she had no strength to shout. She lifted her finger weakly, but merely scratched the threshold feebly, leaving a wet trail of blood. Sharon kicked the blood-stained doormat by the back door aside. All traces were cleaned up. Click the door opened, and Ethan walked in. Sharon calmly closed the back door. Ethan, you're back? Ethan paused when he saw her and asked coolly, Why are you here? Sharon walked over slowly. I heard Grace was about to give birth, so I came to see her. But she looked around the room with a puzzled expression. But after I got here, I didn't see her. Ethan's face was cold, his mood completely unreadable. His gaze rested on the floor for a second, then he stared into Sharon's eyes and asked, I'll ask you one more time. Why are you here? Sharon stiffened and squeezed out an innocent smile. Ethan, why do you look so fierce? I really just came to see her, but I didn't expect her not to be here. Ethan approached Sharon. His face was cold, and the air pressure around him was terrifyingly low. After 3 steps, he stopped. He saw the smear of blood on the back door frame, and his brow furrowed instantly. Ethan reached out to open the back door. Ethan, Sharon quickly grabbed his hand. I just got a call from the nanny saying our child has a high fever. Let's go back quickly. Ethan threw off Sharon's hand and shoved the back door open. A trail of blood extended from the doorway all the way to where the spare car was parked in the yard. Sharon's face turned pale, her eyes revealing fear. Ethan stared at Sharon, asking word by word, Is this Grace's blood? Sharon trembled and shook her head. I don't know, I just arrived too. Ethan suddenly reached out, grabbed Sharon by the neck and slammed her against the wall. Don't try to lie to me. I smelled blood the moment I walked in. Ethan practically gritted his teeth. Tell me the truth. Where is Grace? Sharon started crying, looking pitiful. It was Dr. Stone. He begged me to bring him to see Grace. I was soft-hearted, so I brought him, but I didn't expect him and Grace to get into an argument. While pushing and shoving, Grace fell and went into premature labor. The blood came out then. Ethan frowned, not believing it. Really? Sharon choked with sobs. If you don't believe me, go chase them. They went to the nearest hospital. Doctor, Stone must be there. They even said they would run away together after the baby is born. Ethan's face instantly became terrifyingly gloomy. He threw Sharon aside, rushed out of the villa, started his car, and roared towards the nearest hospital. Once he was gone, Sharon immediately took out her phone. Upon arriving at the hospital, Ethan sprinted inside, grabbed the receptionist nurse, and asked, Where is Grace Green? The nurse checked and replied, There is no patient named Grace Green in the hospital. No, Ethan frowned. Just as he was about to continue questioning, a chaotic noise came from behind him. Make way, a man was shouting. Doctor, help doctor. Ethan turned around and saw Xander as well as Grace, whom he was holding in his arms. He immediately rushed over. Xander Stone seeing him, Xander's face also changed. What are you doing here? Ethan looked down and saw Grace, half covered in blood, dying and unconscious in Xander's arms. His eyes darkened. He moved forward, reaching out to take Grace into his own arms. "Give her to me," Xander stepped back. "Ethan Blackwood, if you really want Grace to die, then go ahead and block me." Ethan's hand paused. Xander stepped around him and ran towards the emergency room. Doctors and nurses arrived quickly and wheeled Grace into the emergency operating room. As soon as the door closed, Ethan punched Xander in the face. "What did you do to her?" Xander's mouth bled. He wiped it away forcefully. "What did I do to her?" "Ethan, shouldn't you be asking yourself that question? Don't you know clearly in your own heart what you've done to Grace?" Ethan stepped forward and grabbed Xander's collar. "She is my wife, no matter." Before the argument could finish, the emergency room door suddenly opened. The rest of Ethan's words were stuck in his throat. The doctor took off his mask and said regretfully, "I'm sorry, the patient arrived too late. Neither the child in her womb nor she herself could be saved. Please accept my condolences." After speaking, the doctor stepped aside. "Family of the patient, you may claim the body now." Ethan's mind went blank, a chill instantly sweeping through his entire body. "What body? Are you saying Grace is dead?" He just found it ridiculous. What kind of broken hospital is this? You can't even cure a person. Saying this, Ethan walked quickly into the ward, his figure trembling slightly. A nurse was covering Grace's face with a white sheet. "What do you think you're doing?" Ethan shoved the young nurse away. "She isn't dead yet." The nurse was pushed into the corner, but having seen many family members react like this, she was used to it. "Sir, I am very sorry we couldn't save this lady. Please accept our condolences." Ethan gently wiped the bloodstains off Grace's face. He could still feel Grace's warmth. How could she be dead? "You're lying." Ethan looked at Grace and said softly, "Grace, I'll transfer you to another hospital. We'll go somewhere else." Saying this, he tried to pick Grace up from the hospital bed. Sir, you can't do this." The nurse screamed, asking Ethan to put down the body. But the current Ethan couldn't hear anything clearly. He only felt an immense weight in his arms. His legs felt like jelly. Stumbling, Ethan fell to the floor. Grace's body fell too, making a dull thud on the ground. "What are you doing, you bastard?" Xander rushed in, quickly helped Grace up from the floor, and shouted abuse at Ethan. Ethan, however, could only see Xander's mouth opening and closing without hearing any sound. He roared, "Give Grace back to me, I want to take her for treatment." Xander cursed at him, calling him a lunatic, saying Grace was killed by him. Hearing this, Ethan punched Xander in the face, raging, "Grace isn't dead." Ethan glared viciously at Xander, veins popping on his forehead, his eyes bloodshot, looking terrifying. For a moment, Xander actually didn't react. Ethan snatched Grace from his hands, holding her as he tried to walk out. "Grace, we're changing hospitals." Ethan's lips moved, but no sound came out. As Ethan walked, his vision gradually blurred. Eventually, he couldn't even see the road clearly. With a severe pain in his neck, Ethan fainted directly. When he woke up again, Ethan was lying in a hospital bed, his neck still throbbing with lingering pain. Memory gradually returned. Ethan flipped out of bed, grabbed a passing nurse, and asked, "Where is Grace? Where is she?" "Mr. Blackwood, Miss Green was taken away and has already been cremated." "You're lying." Ethan lost his composure for the first time, shouting with a red neck, his handsome face full of anger. "She isn't dead." Ethan didn't even change his clothes. He walked straight to the OB-GYN department to find Xander. "Sir, Dr. Stone resigned 2 days ago." Xander was gone, and Grace's body had disappeared too. Ethan lowered his head and sat in front of the maternity ward door. With messy hair, he looked soulless, but the eyes hidden by his bangs were burning. He didn't believe Grace was really dead. There was no record of Grace in the morgue. Xander had no relation to Grace and had no right to cremate her. Right, Grace had a brother abroad. Ethan stood up abruptly and walked quickly toward the parking lot. He needed to find Grace's brother. Grace's brother had been academically excellent since childhood and had been abroad since high school. Their mother passed away early, and their father was a womanizer who remarried within days. Aside from providing some living expenses, he didn't care about anything. Grace cherished her precious brother very much. As long as Grace was alive, she would definitely contact her brother. "Hello, find me all the information on my wife's brother." Within 5 minutes, Ethan snapped out of his decadent state and turned back into the vigorous CEO of Blackwood International. Grace's brother, Felix Green, was a science student in Massachusetts. When Ethan contacted him, Felix thought his sister had changed her phone number. "Hello, Felix." It was a strange man's voice. "Who are you?" There was a silence on the other end before the voice said, "I am your sister's husband. My name is Ethan Blackwood." He knew his sister got married a year ago, but every time he returned to the country, he had never met this legendary brother-in-law. Even at the wedding, he only glanced at him from afar and had forgotten what he looked like. Felix bought the fastest flight ticket back to the country. Ethan waited at the airport exit wearing sunglasses. From a distance, he saw a handsome boy walking over, looking 50% like Grace. Ethan was about to raise his hand to signal, but as soon as the boy saw him, his cheek twitched and he rushed up and punched him directly. Felix hit Ethan fiercely, the red veins in his eyes as deep as red ink. The moment he knew his sister had left this world, he could barely hold his phone. His vision went black and waves of coldness washed over him. He wanted to kill Ethan so badly Ethan let him hit him, taking punch after punch solidly, as if it were a punishment for himself, or perhaps he could no longer feel pain. It wasn't until airport security came to pull them apart that Felix stopped, glaring at Ethan while panting, looking like an angry little lion. "I'm sorry." Ethan said this very softly, as if to Felix, but also to himself. After calming down, they sat in the Blackwood villa. What exactly happened? Felix spoke first to break the silence. Ethan pondered for a moment, but still told everything, though he hid the fact that Grace miscarried because of Sharon. Felix sneered after listening. "My sister was really blind. How could she marry a person like you? If you ask me, she would be better off with that Dr. Stone. At least she'd have some peace." Ethan didn't speak. "Where is my sister now?" "I don't know." Felix stood up abruptly, grabbing Ethan's collar, almost wanting to eat him alive. "How can you not know?" Felix, young and impetuous, couldn't hold back his temper and raised his fist to hit Ethan again. Ethan covered his face painfully. "I really don't know. That's why I called you back." Grace was missing. No matter how much Felix demanded compensation from Ethan, it wouldn't help. He took a deep breath and sat back down. "So what do we do now?" To be honest, Ethan didn't know how to find Grace either. He couldn't just search aimlessly. But he didn't want to sit and wait for death. Since Xander took Grace away, they had to start with him. Just as Ethan wanted to go out with Felix, Sharon arrived. "Ethan, who is this?" Sharon took off her sunglasses and looked at Felix arrogantly. Now that she had no obstacles, the title of Ethan's wife would eventually be hers. Sharon was incredibly happy about this, and her conduct became increasingly high profile. Felix was smart. He recognized the uninvited guest's relationship with Ethan at a glance. His face darkened instantly, and he snorted coldly, walking quickly ahead. Ethan had a headache. He just threw a sentence at Sharon, "I have something to do, you go back first," and quickly chased after Felix. Sharon couldn't help narrowing her eyes, looking thoughtfully at Felix's tall and straight back. Grace had a brother, and that boy looked somewhat like Grace. Could it be? It wasn't strange for Felix to return to the country at this time. What was strange was that Ethan actually left her to chase after Felix. Sharon had been by Ethan's side for a year and knew his temperament pretty well. If he didn't care about Grace, he definitely wouldn't act like this. Sharon slowly clenched her fist. This Felix better not ruin her plans, or else his end would definitely be the same as Grace's hello. Sharon took out her phone and made a call. "Track Ethan for me. Also, pay special attention to that kid beside him. I'll pay half the money up front." Felix demanded to go to the hospital where Grace worked. Ethan could only go along with him. Grace passed away suddenly before resigning. Her things were all put in the storage room, waiting for family to claim them. Out of respect for the dead, all past matters dissipated like smoke. Seeing Felix and Ethan come together, the hospital staff didn't gossip but led them to a small room. Grace's effects weren't many. Some notebooks, potted plants, and a photo of her and Ethan. Ethan felt a pang of sadness looking at the meticulously wiped photo frame and glass. Felix couldn't hold it back. While flipping through Grace's things, he began to sob quietly. Ethan tried to take the photo, but Felix slapped his hand away. "Get away, you have no right to touch my sister's things." Indeed, he had done so many things to wrong Grace, eventually causing her to almost die. What right did he have to ask for Felix's forgiveness? Expressionless, Felix carried the box of Grace's things out of the hospital. Sitting in the car, Felix said to Ethan, "I will apply for early graduation and then return to find my sister." He took a business card from his pocket and handed it to Ethan. "This is my contact info. Contact me immediately if you have any news about my sister. Ethan Blackwood, if you have any conscience left, do something a human should do." After speaking, Felix got out of Ethan's car holding the box and hailed a taxi. Ethan watched the taxi drive slowly away, feeling increasingly suffocated. He sat quietly in the car, the small space so confined it depressed him. He watched the parking lot lights turn on, cars coming and going. In just those few short hours, he seemed to have experienced the myriad forms of life. He suddenly felt fate was ridiculous. If not for that incident back then, he and Grace would be happy together, and their child would be old enough to buy soy sauce. A year ago, he and Grace dated for a year and naturally walked down the aisle. However, on their wedding night, the two argued over a small matter. And starting from that night, Ethan's heart for Grace died completely. After that, he deliberately found Sharon, who had always admired him, and put on a show in front of Grace every day. His original intention was just to make Grace angry, that's all. Ring, 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 the sharp ringtone broke Ethan's memories, pulling him back to reality. Ethan answered without looking at the caller ID. "Hello. Ethan, the baby." "The baby seems sick. Come quickly," on the other end was Sharon's anxious voice. Actually, the child was fine. It was just an excuse Sharon made up because she wanted to see Ethan and have him stay with her. She thought Ethan would rush over anxiously. However, an hour later, just as Sharon was getting impatient from waiting, Ethan arrived tardily. "Ethan, why did it take you so long?" Sharon beamed upon seeing Ethan enter and went up to link arms with him. Ethan instantly felt incredibly disgusted. "I'll go see the child." Seeing Ethan dodge her, Sharon gritted her teeth in resentment. She guessed right. Ethan really had developed feelings for Grace. She absolutely would not allow this to happen in the nursery. A little baby was sleeping peacefully in the cradle, a warm yellow light on overhead. Ethan turned off the light, gently closed the door, and walked out. "Since the child is fine, I'll leave first. I have matters waiting for me to handle." The sense of distance and coldness in Ethan's words finally made Sharon snap. She hugged Ethan from behind, choking with sobs. "Ethan, what exactly did I do wrong? Why have you been so cold lately? Did you fall in love with Grace?" As these words came out, Sharon felt Ethan's body stiffen instantly. Ethan laughed self-mockingly. He had loved Grace from the beginning. What was there to talk about, falling in love? Ethan peeled Sharon's fingers off one by one, turned around, and looked at her coldly. "Sharon, it's time to end this." What?" Sharon's pupils contracted, unable to believe her ears. "Grace is missing. There is no need for your existence anymore." Ethan had always been decisive. He never loved Sharon, never. Sharon blinked, and then large tears began to fall, smudging her eyeshadow and eyeliner into a mess. "Ethan, why?" "Ethan, I love you so much. Why are you breaking up with me?" Ethan was extremely heartless, offering no further explanation, and stepped forward to leave. Sharon was unwilling to accept this. She had accompanied Ethan for a whole year, acting in so many scenes, just so that one day she could legitimately marry into the Blackwood family. But now, Grace was dead. No one could stop Sharon from marrying into the Blackwood family. Yet everything she could almost touch was shattered by a single sentence from Ethan. She wasn't resigned to this. Sharon grabbed Ethan's hand and sobbed. "Ethan, even if you want to break up with me, won't you consider our child? He's so small. How can he endure life without a father?" As Sharon spoke, her voice became more miserable. "If you really don't want us, mother and son, what meaning is there for us to live? I might as well take our son and jump off a building." Sharon spoke urgently, but inside she felt victory was in her grasp. She was certain Ethan would soften and, for the sake of the child, marry her. However, Ethan sneered, his voice freezing cold. "Do you think I really don't know anything?" Sharon's motion of wiping her tears froze instantly. "I haven't touched you for a year. Don't you know where that child came from?" Although Ethan dragged Sharon to put on a show in front of Grace, he didn't want to get involved with this woman. Sharon was obviously flustered, quibbling, "The child. Wasn't it that time you got drunk, and then we accidentally?" But Ethan's terrifying gaze made Sharon inexplicably guilty, and she felt uncertain. Would I not know if we did it or not? Ethan interrupted Sharon, unintentionally becoming sharper. The child isn't mine at all, Sharon. You really have thick skin. Sharon's face turned pale. She never thought Ethan knew everything then. Why did he pretend not to know and treat her so well? Could it be that everything was just a show for Grace? Sharon couldn't help stepping back 2 paces, bumping into the coffee table behind her. She held onto the table to barely keep herself from falling. You did it for Grace. Exactly, Ethan answered without hesitation. I deliberately acted with you just to make Grace angry, indulging you to cause trouble in front of Grace time and again. But I didn't expect you to be so vicious to marry me. You didn't hesitate to hurt Grace, and you even tried to pin the child you had with some wild man on me. Sharon, let me tell you, I'm sparing your life now solely for the sake of the child. In the future, you better behave yourself. Ethan finished speaking through gritted teeth, ignoring Sharon completely, turned around and left directly. Unable to support herself, Sharon finally collapsed on the floor. So that was it turned out. It was all for Grace. Even the fact that she, Sharon, could cling to Ethan was because of Grace. She had naively thought Ethan really fell in love with her. Even if it was all acting before, she would definitely be able to marry Ethan in the end. But in the end, it was all because of her. Grace Green, Sharon screamed in hatred, her entire face twisting. Grace Green, Sharon wiped her face with a tissue and dialed a number. Give me Grace's brother's information. 15 minutes later, the other party sent a location. Sharon grabbed her car keys and walked out the door. Felix found a hotel. He booked a flight for tomorrow afternoon. While there was still some time, he wanted to stay in the city a little longer. Breathing the air of the city where his sister once lived felt as if she were still by his side. He wasn't familiar with this city. It only became his second hometown because his sister settled here. As Felix walked, crossing a bustling downtown area, he arrived under a relatively deserted overpass. When he wanted to turn back, he realized he was lost. Just then, 2 young men were standing nearby talking. Felix walked up to them to ask for directions to the hotel. However, the 2 young men looked very strange. They exchanged a glance, one nodded to the other, and then, unknown who pulled out something, sprayed it in his face. Felix knew they had bad intentions and instinctively tried to hold his breath, but his vision went black and he fainted. Kidnapping, this was the last thought in his mind. When he woke up again, he was tied to a chair and a woman was sitting opposite him. He had just seen that woman today. It was Ethan's mistress. It was Sharon who kidnapped him. Sharon was simply crazy, having lost her mind. Seeing Felix wake up, she slapped him directly across the face. Caught off guard, Felix couldn't dodge. What are you doing? Doing what? Sharon sneered. I should be asking what you siblings want to do. Your sister was that kind of person. You, as her brother, must not be much better. Sharon's eyes were bloodshot. I'm going to kill you just like I killed your sister. Felix was startled at first, then extremely furious. So it was you who hurt my sister. It's all because of you? Seeing Felix struggling excitedly, Sharon laughed maniacally. Her sharp voice sounded like an old witch, scary and hateful. Ha 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 ha, so what if Ethan never loved me? The person he loves still died by my hands. Sharon laughed triumphantly and said to the air, Grace, watch closely, your brother is coming down to join you too, ha 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 ha. Sharon took a sharp dagger from the table and slowly walked toward Felix. Felix calmed himself and gathered his strength, not panicking at all. When Sharon walked in front of him, he suddenly raised his right leg, which could still move, and kicked Sharon in the lower abdomen with all his might. Sharon screamed and was kicked half a meter away. Seizing the opportunity, Felix tried to untie the rope on his hands. But unexpectedly, there was another person standing behind him. That man firmly grabbed Felix's hands, and immediately after, a cold, bone-chilling dagger was pressed against Felix's throat. Ha 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 ha, Sharon laughed arrogantly. You really are exactly like your sister, thinking you're so smart you are both going to die because you are too self-righteous. Sharon scrambled up from the ground, picked up the dagger, raised her hand, and aimed to stab it into Felix's chest. Felix gritted his teeth. Thinking he'd gamble, he kicked Sharon hard. Using the recoil, he slammed the back of his head viciously into the man behind him. No one expected the change to happen so fast. The man reacted first, stabbing Felix fiercely in the arm. Felix cried out in pain and fell to the ground along with the chair, looking to die. The man flew into a rage, grabbed Felix by the collar, and punched him. Bang! The room door was suddenly kicked open, followed by a stream of police officers holding guns. Nobody move, hands up. Both Sharon and the man were startled. Although the man was ruthless, he had never seen such a lineup and instinctively raised his hands. Sharon, fallen on the ground, still tried to pick up the dagger. Police officers rushed in swiftly, kicked the dagger away, and aimed black gun barrels at Sharon's head. Don't move, rushing in afterward was Ethan. He helped up the dying Felix from the ground and shouted out the door, "Doctor." When Sharon was subdued and put into the police car, she stared at Ethan with desolate, hateful eyes. If looks could kill, Ethan had no doubt he would have died hundreds of times. Felix had given him a business card earlier. Considering Sharon's personality, Ethan considered that she might transfer her hatred to Felix, so he had asked Felix to turn on his phone location. When Felix's phone was discarded in an abandoned garage, Ethan knew something had happened to him, so he asked the police to track Sharon's whereabouts. Fortunately, they arrived in the nick of time and saved Felix. Otherwise, he really wouldn't have the face to see Grace. After being arrested, Sharon showed no repentance. She claimed repeatedly that it was the Green siblings' fault and that she was merely exacting revenge. Even at the end, she went crazy at the police station. "Why don't you go kill Ethan Blackwood and Felix Green? Why are you interrogating me here?" Sharon's hair was a mess, her crazed appearance simply like a lunatic. "Kill them," the police officer taking her statement, came out of the interrogation room helplessly and shook his head at Ethan, who was sitting outside. Sharon still refuses to confess. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Did her accomplices confess?" The officer nodded. "They confessed to kidnapping Felix without reservation, pushing all responsibility onto Sharon, saying she ordered them. But regarding hurting or murdering Mrs. Blackwood, they didn't admit a word." Ethan's goal wasn't simply to send Sharon to prison. She had hurt Grace so cruelly. Ethan wanted Sharon to spend her life in prison, repenting and atoning for her crimes forever, but obviously, kidnapping doesn't carry a life sentence. Then let's follow the original procedure first. "Thank you for your trouble. Mr. Blackwood, you are too polite." Sharon had wiped all traces clean. In the end, she applied for a psychiatric evaluation and got bail. Ethan didn't intervene, he watched quietly. Felix, on the other hand, was hopping mad in the hospital. "I say, Ethan, what are you thinking? She almost killed my sister, how could you let her be laid out?" Felix looked at the composed man, holding a breath of anger in his chest, getting angrier the more he looked at him. Ethan's eyes were cold. "The police can't do anything to her, but I can. I won't let anyone off who hurt your sister." The tone of Ethan's voice was extremely eerie, like an usura from hell. So, on a sunny afternoon, after Sharon had been detained for 10 days and walked out of the detention center completely intact, Ethan called a group of people to invite Sharon to the Blackwood villa. In the pitch-black basement, Sharon was tied up, her mouth stuffed full of stones. MMPH. Sharon struggled a couple of times, but the ropes bound her tightly. She couldn't move at all. After an unknown amount of time, the basement door was opened, making a dull sound, like opening a long sealed door of memories. "Sharon, long time no see." Ethan stood in front of Sharon, entirely hidden in the shadows so Sharon could only see a blurry outline. Another man walked over from behind him. Hands wearing white latex gloves pulled the small stones out of Sharon's mouth. The rough stones scraped against Sharon's tender mouth, causing blood to flow. Seeing that Sharon could speak, Ethan spoke coldly. "Tell me, how should I punish you?" "Ethan Blackwood, you deserve it." Sharon spat a mouthful of bloody saliva at him. "Ha ha ha ha, I killed Grace. I killed the person you love most. Are you dying of sadness?" "Ha ha ha ha, you deserve it. Ethan, you just deserve it. Grace deserved to betray you." Sharon laughed louder and louder, piercingly ear-splitting. "Being a cheap father to my child. You aren't worthy, ha 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 ha. You are the murderer, you killed Grace." Ethan's fingernails dug deep into his flesh. After a long while, he released his grip. "Break her legs and throw her out?" "Yes," the thug nodded respectfully in agreement. Ethan suddenly felt very tired and turned to walk out of the basement. But what Ethan didn't expect was that after he left the basement, Felix sneaked in. The thugs knew him, so they treated Felix as half a master. Felix watched expressionlessly as Sharon's legs were beaten until broken, then smiled, looking completely harmless. "Give her to me." With the thug's help, Felix put Sharon in a car and drove to the suburbs. Someone contacted by his American friend was waiting there. "Mr. Green, is this the chick you mentioned?" The person looked like a hoodlum, a cigarette dangling from his mouth as he looked Sharon up and down. "Looks not bad, just these legs. I'm not charging you anyway. Just take her away." Felix was so cold he didn't seem like a 20-year-old boy. "All right then." The man nodded, took the unconscious Sharon, and threw her directly over his shoulder. Blood flowed continuously, staining the man's coat. Felix turned and sent a thank you text to his American friend. That person replied quickly, "No thanks needed. I should thank you for giving our family a chick for free. That American friend's family was in the gray business." Growing up alone abroad, Felix faced various hardships that went without saying. He originally thought Ethan would kill Sharon, but he didn't expect him to just break her legs and be done with it. Since that was the case, don't blame Felix for taking action himself. Back in the villa, Ethan listened to the thug's report, paused only for a moment, said, "I know," and acted as if nothing had happened. Back in the apartment, Ethan couldn't sleep in the middle of the night, so he got up to smoke by the window. Only then did he realize that this room had no view. A towering tree blocked everything. Except for the rough brown trunk, nothing could be seen. When autumn came, countless fallen leaves could be seen drifting down. In winter, snowflakes fluttered. But in summer and spring, there was nothing. Grace's belongings were few, almost pitiably so, not even many clothes. During the year Ethan fought with Grace, he only focused on hurting her and didn't notice what she ate or wore every day. The more Ethan thought, the more irritable he became. He didn't turn on the light and wanted to go to the living room for water, but somehow he bumped into something. That thing shattered all over the floor. Ethan turned on the light. It was a glass lampshade Grace had given him when they were still dating. Grace had collected everything related to Ethan and kept it in the apartment, as if Ethan was still by her side. Ethan couldn't help feeling heartbroken. He picked up the fragments with his bare hands. The glass lampshade was exquisite. Grace had specially found a master to learn from and then carved and made it herself by hand. Ethan was delighted when he received it, and a few days later, they got engaged. He had always kept this lampshade safe until the wedding day. There seemed to be something under the fragments. Ethan found it strange. He never knew this lampshade could be opened. It was a letter. Inside were words asking Ethan to take good care of himself. At that time, Ethan's grandfather was sick. Ethan ran to the hospital every day, and a big project in the company was in progress and couldn't do without him. Ethan was so busy he didn't even have time to sleep. Grace gave him a lampshade, hoping this little lamp could replace her to accompany Ethan to sleep. Ethan's grandfather strongly opposed their relationship. Because of Grace's family background and a brother studying abroad, grandfather always felt Grace wasn't good enough for Ethan. Ethan's parents died early, and his grandfather raised him. If Grace hadn't insisted, Ethan wouldn't have been able to withstand grandfather's daily nagging, even threatening to disown him. On the day grandfather passed away, Ethan was overwhelmed with company matters, and it was Grace taking care of grandfather. However, by the time Ethan arrived, grandfather had died after treatment failed. The doctor said grandfather had a cerebral hemorrhage while using the restroom, leading to death due to delayed rescue. At that time, Grace was suddenly called to the hospital for emergency surgery and didn't get to take care of grandfather. Grace blamed herself very much and once wanted to break up with Ethan. To prove his love for Grace, Ethan got engaged to her. In front of grandfather's memorial tablet, the two solemnly swore to be together forever. However, on the wedding day, the two started arguing over a small matter. Anger rushed to their heads. In a moment of desperation, Grace blurted out, "If I had known, I shouldn't have agreed to you so early." Ethan was someone who responded to softness but not hardness. "Yeah, if grandfather had been tougher, maybe I would have married some rich lady now, and grandfather wouldn't have died. Are you blaming me for killing grandfather?" Grace looked at Ethan in disbelief, tears filling her eyes. "Yes, I killed grandfather, all right. I knew he could get sick at any time. I could have turned down that surgery, but I went anyway." Ethan shook all over. So it was true, it really was, because Grace held a grudge against grandfather that she killed him. All the blood in Ethan's body rushed to his head. You did it on purpose. Looking at the stunningly beautiful woman in front of him, he refused to admit she was a person who would use any means to marry him. Grace choked with sobs, unable to speak. Ethan thought she admitted it by default, slammed the door, and left, not returning home for a week. Since then, Ethan had always believed Grace was a very vain woman who racked her brains to marry him for money and status. But grandfather's sudden cerebral hemorrhage was unforeseen by anyone, and Grace was not responsible. Ethan continued reading the letter. Grace wrote, "Although grandfather is stubborn, he is actually very good to me. If my father could take care of us siblings, would your grandfather agree to us being together? No matter what, I will make grandfather accept me. I happen to be off for the next few days, so let me take care of grandfather." At the end of the letter, Grace drew a cute smiley face and a little person with puffed cheeks shouting, "Fighting?" It turned out Grace never blamed grandfather. It was always Ethan who misunderstood Grace. Ethan's hands trembled violently. His heart ached intensely, not even feeling the glass shards digging into his feet. Why was he so stupid? Why didn't he believe Grace? And did so many things to break her heart. Ethan cried out in pain. Tears of regret dripped onto the letter, ink spreading out like someone's drop of blood. Ethan first checked the exit records, then the national flight and high-speed rail records, but found no trace of Grace or Xander. Grace was seriously injured and hadn't recovered, so Xander couldn't have taken her very far. Ethan spent a fortune publishing missing person notices on shopping mall screens and TV stations across almost the entire country. Subsequently, he specifically contacted a private search team to inspect nearby towns. For nearly half a year, Ethan handed over company matters to his subordinates, conducting video calls with them daily to hear about major company issues. Since he started looking for Grace, his whereabouts became increasingly unstable. In short, wherever there was news of Grace, even if it was as illusory as a bubble, he would rush there without hesitation. A year later, he received another call from a small southern town. The person said he saw a woman who looked almost exactly like Grace, but he couldn't be sure if it was her. Ethan rushed to the south overnight. It was a small town surrounded by mountains, very secluded but with relatively convenient transportation. The man spoke a mix of half-baked Mandarin and local dialect, babbling a lot to Ethan. Ethan barely understood a few words and missed all the important content. The local got impatient and waved to leave, so Ethan quickly took out a stack of cash. Finally, finding a local who spoke standard Mandarin, Ethan figured it out. This local sold vegetables in the market. One day when leaving home, he accidentally saw a missing person poster on his door. The woman on it looked very much like someone he knew. "That woman comes to buy vegetables from me every day after work. I save the best for her. She looks like she comes from a big city, speaks with the same accent as you, and looks clean and fair, very likable at first sight." However, regrettably, the local didn't know the woman's name or where she lived, only knowing she was a kindergarten teacher. Ethan couldn't help feeling disappointed. Grace's profession was a doctor. She had never taken a kindergarten teacher exam, but Ethan decided to take a look at that woman anyway. The next evening, Ethan arrived punctually at the place where the local sold vegetables. The market had a smell of decay and was dirty everywhere. Ethan picked a slightly cleaner spot and watched the local's vegetable stall quietly. Many people passed by. Quite a few looked at Ethan, but seeing his extraordinary demeanor, they just glanced and walked away. Ethan was extremely patient, waiting for over an hour. Seeing it was getting dark, the woman whom the local said looked like Grace still hadn't appeared. Maybe the woman had already appeared, but she wasn't Grace at all. Maybe the local just thought they looked alike? After all, that was a kindergarten teacher. Just as Ethan stepped forward to leave, a woman carrying a vintage bag ran over, panting. "Luckily you haven't closed yet." The woman smiled thankfully upon seeing the local, but her tone dropped in the blink of an eye. "Oh, there aren't many vegetables left." The local said something, and the woman replied, "I worked overtime today. A kid went home a bit late." They were still talking, but Ethan couldn't hear anything anymore. He just stared fixedly at the woman's back. It seemed like one glance lasted 10,000 years. Ethan felt time slow down instantly. The air was filled with heavy molecules condensed because time was too weighty. Almost motionless, flowing. "Grace!" Ethan wanted to call out, but his voice was stuck in his throat, unable to come out or go down. That familiar back, the voice he could recognize with his eyes closed. How could he forget? Windbreaker, shirt, high-waisted wide leg pants, and the immutable pair of white sneakers. Grace Green, her fashion sense was still that bad. Ethan stood motionless like he was paralyzed, looking at Grace, unwilling to even blink. It felt as if Grace would disappear if he breathed too heavily. Grace bought her vegetables, and the local told her in dialect that a man was looking for her. Grace asked who. The local pointed behind her, but suddenly realized Ethan, who had been there all along, was gone. Grace thought the local was teasing her and got a bit angry. The local was an honest man. His face turned red as he insisted he was telling the truth. Finally, Grace left half believing, murmuring to herself. Only after Grace walked far away did Ethan step out from the shadows. He didn't dare to recognize Grace. Grace carried the vegetables home and found that Xander had already finished work. His slippers weren't at the door, but he wasn't in the living room either. "Xander Doc Stone," Grace shouted. Xander's response came from the bedroom. He was stuffing things into a suitcase. "Xander, are you going on a business trip again?" Grace was used to Xander traveling every day. "You aren't some expert, so why are you always invited to seminars?" "Isn't it because your brother has superb medical skills?" Grace spat at him. "You have no shame. A year ago, Xander took the injured Grace to recuperate in a friend's private clinic, staying in the hospital for over a month. Grace almost died from her injuries. Excessive blood loss led to cerebral hypoxia, and she slept for 3 days before waking up. When she woke up, she didn't remember anything. She was extremely sensitive, unwilling to let anyone near her, especially men and women wearing heavy makeup and high heels. She would scream upon seeing those women. Grace forgot Xander, forgot she used to be a doctor, forgot Ethan, and even forgot herself. Xander didn't want to hurt Grace anymore, so he told her he was her brother, and she had lost her memory in a car accident. When Grace had recovered mostly, Xander took her to this southern town and lived a secluded life. The next day, Grace got up as usual to go to work. While buying breakfast, a man struck up a conversation with her. "Do you like eating breakfast from this place?" The man's voice was extremely magnetic, but Grace thought he wasn't talking to her, so she didn't lift her head, continuing to watch the shopkeeper make her egg pancake. Grace, hearing her name, Grace looked up abruptly, only to find a completely strange man in front of her. "Did you call me?" Seeing Grace's confused look, Ethan couldn't help but freeze. He had been waiting at the entrance of Grace's residential complex since 6 in the morning just to admit his mistakes to her and hope she would go back with him. He had thought of all the bad outcomes, even the possibility that Grace and Xander were married, but he never expected that Grace didn't seem to recognize him. "Miss, your egg pancake." The shopkeeper handed the pancake to Grace. Ethan stood there stunned. Grace looked at him strangely, turned, and was about to leave. "Wait a minute," Ethan quickly grabbed Grace. "Don't you recognize me?" Grace was about to be late. She hurriedly took a few bites of the egg pancake, shook off Ethan's hand, and ran toward the kindergarten, shouting back at Ethan as she ran. "Call me if you need something. I'm going to be late for work." Ethan reached out again but grabbed empty air. But his heart was filled with a warm feeling. He didn't know if this was fortunate or unfortunate. Grace didn't remember him, forgetting all their past. The sweet, the happy, the painful, the sentimental, but this was fine too. Throwing away those memories, Ethan would pursue her again. As long as Grace wasn't married, Ethan would definitely win her back. When Grace got off work that day, Ethan was waiting at the kindergarten gate. He leaned casually against his car, looking around carelessly. His exceptionally handsome face immediately attracted a lot of attention. Grace led a group of children out. A group of parents gathered to pick up their kids, and Grace said goodbye to them one by one with a smile. Seeing that the people around her had finally cleared, just as Ethan wanted to step forward, Grace waved into the kindergarten again, and a delicately carved little boy walked out timidly. "Let's go, teacher will walk you home." Grace smiled and squatted down to look the little boy in the eye. The little boy glanced at her, then looked down again, appearing very introverted. Grace's outstretched hand hung awkwardly in midair. She felt helpless. This child had just transferred here today. The parents said that due to a nanny issue before, he wasn't willing to communicate with people anymore. But the parents were too busy to even pick up or drop off the child, so they could only ask the teacher to personally take the child home. None of the teachers in the kindergarten wanted to take this task. Grace volunteered to accept it, just for that extra $1,000. Grace didn't know why, but subconsciously she felt she needed to save a lot of money, though she had forgotten the reason. "Would you like some candy?" Suddenly, a gentle male voice sounded above Grace's head. A slender hand held out a handful of lollipops in front of the little boy. Grace was startled. She looked up and met a pair of gentle, affectionate eyes. This man, wasn't he the one she had seen this morning? "It's you, sir," Ethan smiled. "This child is very well behaved." "What is his name?" "Charlie." Little Charlie looked at Ethan's sharp jawline, and his hesitant little hand shrank back. "Take what the uncle is giving you," Grace said, patting the little boy's head. A small hand finally reached out tremblingly and grasped one of the lollipops. The town wasn't large, and most people attending this kindergarten lived in the area. The little boy's home wasn't far. It was in the Villa district, by the river behind them. Ethan made up an excuse to walk the little boy home with Grace. Little Charlie didn't resist Ethan much. When Ethan offered to hold his hand to cross the street, the small hand didn't pull away. Ethan bit by bit drew information out of Grace. When he learned that Grace wasn't married and didn't even have a boyfriend, he was simply ecstatic. If they hadn't been on a main road, he would have wanted to hug Grace right there. "Being a kindergarten teacher must be hard work," Ethan smiled politely. "Why did Miss Green choose this profession?" Actually, what he wanted to ask more was why Grace gave up her profession as a doctor. Was it because of those past events? Grace smiled. "Children are very cute. I especially like staying with children. They are innocent and adorable. You might not believe it, but I spent 3 months getting my teacher's certification, and I've been working for less than 5 months. Although it's a bit tiring sometimes, hearing those children call me teacher makes it feel very worthwhile." Grace looked proud. Ethan listened seriously and asked again, "Then what work did Miss Green do before?" Speaking of this, Grace's eyes dimmed a little, and she said with some disappointment, "I don't remember." Seeing Ethan's puzzled look, Grace smiled as if it were nothing. "I was in a car accident. When I woke up, I didn't remember anything." "A car accident?" Ethan frowned subconsciously. It seemed Xander had kept quite a few things from Grace. As they walked, they passed an elementary school. It was dismissal time for the lower grades. The originally empty entrance was crowded with people, and there were quite a few vendors selling things. Little Charlie, who had been focused on eating his lollipop, stared intently at the vendors the moment he saw them. Grace noticed his gaze and asked with a smile, "Do you want cotton candy?" Little Charlie didn't look at Grace. Holding the lollipop with both hands, he lowered his head. Seeing how cute he was, Ethan bought 2 cotton candies from the vendor. When the vendor handed them over, he smiled and said, "You husband and wife are really good looking. The child you gave birth to is also handsome." Grace was just about to explain that they weren't husband and wife, but Ethan took over the conversation. "Thank you," he actually admitted it directly. After they walked a distance away, Grace asked with some embarrassment, "Mr. Blackwood, you just..." "For you." Ethan gave 1 cotton candy to little Charlie and handed the other one to Grace. Grace was surprised. She looked up at him abruptly, only to see turbulent waves in the other party's eyes. Under the reflection of the setting sun, that silhouette seemed familiar, as if he had run out of one of Grace's dreams. With just that one glance, Grace was instantly captivated, but inside she felt extremely resistant. Ethan watched Grace's face gradually turn red, but his heart didn't feel good. He had done so many excessive things to Grace, and now he had to use tricks to make Grace fall in love with him. Ethan couldn't help but curse himself for being despicable. Of the 2 people, one desperately suppressed the throbbing in her heart, and the other cursed himself. For a moment, neither moved. It wasn't until little Charlie finished his cotton candy that Grace came back to her senses, took the one in Ethan's hand, and whispered a thank you. For the rest of the journey, no one spoke again. They silently walked little Charlie home. Grace was just about to turn around and say she was going home when Ethan suddenly grabbed her hand. Mr. Blackwood?" Ethan looked at Grace sincerely and said word by word, "Gracie, let me treat you to dinner." It was phrased as a question, but the tone allowed no refusal. No, no need. Grace avoided Ethan's eyes. A blush climbed up her cheeks again, and now even her ears were thoroughly red. Gracie, let me tell you the truth. Actually, I have liked you for a long time. No, it should be love. I have loved you for a very, very long time. Love? Grace was confused. She clearly had just met Ethan today, so why did he say he loved her? Grace looked at Ethan's affectionate appearance with some surprise and suddenly felt afraid. She didn't know why, but the hairs all over her body stood up. Her heart beat wildly. It was a sign of extreme fear. Let go of me, let go of me. Grace struggled very fiercely. Ethan was afraid of hurting her, so he held her loosely. Grace broke free easily. Grace didn't dare to look at Ethan again and ran away in a hurry. Ethan was both puzzled and anxious. Gracie, Grace screamed, hailed a taxi and fled in panic. What was wrong with Grace? Ethan couldn't figure it out. Did his sudden confession scare her? But looking at Grace's appearance, it was clearly terror, as if he were a man-eating monster, and the slightest mistake would leave her without even a corpse. Sitting in the taxi, Grace cried out of fear. Her heartache made it difficult for her to breathe. After Grace returned, she was still in shock. She couldn't think about anything. She cried until she was dizzy and fell directly asleep. In the early morning of the next day, Grace was awakened by nausea. Before she could get up to go to the bathroom, she vomited all over the floor. She hadn't eaten dinner yesterday, so what she threw up was a large puddle of stomach acid. Grace's stomach had always been bad. Missing just one meal tortured her stomach unbearably. She definitely couldn't go to work today. Grace asked for leave from the kindergarten. After gaining a little strength, she ordered takeout. Only after drinking a bowl of porridge did she feel a bit better. After cleaning up the room, she lay on the sofa to watch TV. At noon, someone rang the doorbell. "Who is it?" "It's me." The voice sounded familiar. Grace looked out through the peephole. It was Ethan. "Mr. Blackwood, why are you here?" After calming down, Grace felt somewhat apologetic about her loss of composure yesterday. "Why didn't you go to work today?" Ethan held a thermal container in his hand, half a foot stepping on the doorframe. Grace combed her messy hair with her fingers, somewhat embarrassed. "I'm not feeling very well." Ethan suddenly leaned closer to Grace, their eyes meeting. He asked extremely seriously, "Do you need to go to the hospital?" Unknown if Ethan was intentional or not, when he lowered his voice, it sounded particularly sexy. Grace lowered her head very low and quickly shook it. "If Mr. Blackwood has nothing else, please go back first." As Grace spoke, she tried to close the door. Ethan had quick eyes and hands. He pressed against the door and squeezed half his body in. He said aggrievedly, "Gracie, I specifically asked the director for your address and found the best restaurant to bring you food. Won't you even let me in?" Grace didn't speak. Her lowered head seemed like a silent resistance. Ethan sighed extremely lightly. Grace was always like this, so gentle that even her rejection was mild. "All right, since you are unwilling, I won't go in." "But," Ethan said, handing the thermal container to Grace, "remember to eat. You have a bad stomach." How did Ethan know she had a bad stomach? Grace was puzzled. Thinking of what he said yesterday, could it be? This man in front of her really had been silently watching her for a long time. Seeing Grace still not moving, Ethan smiled bitterly. "You won't even accept the food I sent?" Grace spoke in an extremely small voice. "Forget it. Mr. Blackwood, come in." Grace took a pair of men's slippers from the shoe cabinet. "These are my brother's, but he hasn't worn them yet. You can make do with them." While taking off his shoes, Ethan asked seemingly inadvertently, "Your biological brother?" "No." Grace tilted her head and thought for a moment. "A biological brother from different parents, I guess. Since I lost my memory, he has been taking care of me." "Is that so?" Ethan took the food out of the thermal container. Looking at the small container, it actually held quite a few exquisite dishes. When Ethan was eating, he paid special attention to Grace's preferences. After silently noting them in his heart, he finished all the food she had left over. "Do you still feel bad?" Ethan asked while cleaning up the dining table, telling Grace to go rest. Grace shook her head, feeling somewhat embarrassed. Clearly, she was the host, yet she was letting Ethan clean up. "I'll do it," Ethan smiled. "If you are really bored, just read a book to me." Previously, when they were still dating, Grace liked to read aloud while reading books. Grace's eyes were ruined by reading so much. Grace picked up a random book and stood outside the kitchen, reading softly. Ethan washed the dishes, listening to Grace's voice swirling in his ears, feeling that his heart had never been so peaceful and satisfied. If only this moment could stay forever, how good would that be? As Grace read, she shifted her gaze to Ethan. This man had a mysterious identity and extraordinary looks. If he had conversed with her before, it was impossible for her not to recognize him. Moreover, when they first met, Ethan called out her name. If she hadn't met him in this past year, then he must be someone she met before. But why did Ethan only appear in front of her now? After Ethan finished washing the dishes, Grace asked softly, "Mr. Blackwood, who exactly are you?" Ethan's back froze abruptly. In a flash of lightning, Grace remembered the vegetable vendor saying that a very handsome man was looking for her. Could it be that Ethan was that man? Ethan turned around slowly, looking somewhat flustered. "Gracie, why do you ask this suddenly?" Only then did Grace realize she should be vigilant. Secretly cursing herself for being too stupid, she put down the book and backed away step by step, feeling a cold glass object. Grace gripped it tightly in her hand. What exactly do you want to do? Grace's mind kept guessing. Could it be he came to seek revenge on her former self? Ethan took a step forward. "Gracie, don't be afraid. I have no malicious intent, Stop." Grace pulled out the object from behind her back. It was a red wine bottle. "Don't come over." Ethan looked at Grace with disbelief. "You are very afraid of me." "Why?" Grace bit her lower lip. She didn't know. A heartbroken look appeared in Ethan's eyes. Grace's heart inexplicably ached, as if because Ethan was sad, she was sad too. "Gracie, don't be like this, okay? You can hit me or scold me." Ethan was almost pleading. "Don't be afraid of me, okay?" Grace shrank back. Her fingers tightened around the wine bottle, her knuckles turning white. Her body couldn't help trembling, and she took a step back. Immediately after, she slowly lowered the bottle in her hand. "I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm like this." Grace's body went soft, and she slowly slid down. Ethan quickly supported her and kissed the top of her head lightly. It's okay. Grace calmed down and realized what she was doing. She busily pushed Ethan away. "Mr. Blackwood?" Ethan felt some regret but still maintained his demeanor, smiling gentlemanly. "Sorry, I got a bit agitated." Grace shook her head. The two fell into silence, awkwardly for a moment. Grace turned on the TV. Ethan suddenly said, "I once loved a girl very much." Grace turned her head to look at him. Was Ethan about to talk about his romantic history? Ethan continued, "We once loved each other very much, but because of a small misunderstanding, I did many things that hurt her. I thought she would always be by my side, but in the end, she left me." Grace listened seriously. "Then why don't you go chase her back?" Ethan paused, offering no explanation, his face full of sorrow. "Sorry," Grace thought she had poked Ethan's sore spot. "I didn't mean to pry into your private matters. I just can't understand if two people still love each other, and the misunderstanding is cleared up, why can't they be together?" Yes, after the misunderstanding is cleared up, would Grace forgive him? Can those painful past events really vanish like smoke? Ethan was afraid. He dared not say, dared not admit, that the heroine of the story was Grace. Before leaving, Ethan agreed with Grace that he would come to see her again tomorrow on the weekend. Grace closed the door feeling a bit strange. How long had she known Ethan? What was this between them now? Before the next day arrived, at dusk, Grace received a call from the director saying that a large corporation invited young teachers from their kindergarten for training. Grace was the teacher with the least seniority in the kindergarten, so she was sent to participate. That corporation covered an extremely wide range of industries. Education was just a drop in the ocean of its assets. Grace felt the corporation's name was inexplicably familiar. She told Ethan about it, packed her luggage, and went to Capital City. Grace had heard of specialized training for kindergarten teachers for the first time, so she was somewhat excited. Soon, she became familiar with teachers from other cities. There weren't many people. Including Grace, there were only 20 people, 3 of whom were from inside the corporation. After listening to a speech in a conference room, they went back to their rooms to rest. Grace was actually arranged a room in a 5-star hotel. Grace couldn't help marveling that a big corporation was indeed a big corporation. This generosity was too great. In the evening, someone notified Grace to go downstairs for dinner. When she arrived at the lobby, she unexpectedly found that Ethan was also there. "Mr. Blackwood?" Grace felt a sense of reliability meeting an acquaintance in a strange place. "Why are you here?" Ethan pretended to be surprised. So the person coming was really you? What's going on? Ethan then explained. Actually, this training was entirely Ethan's idea. To prevent Grace from being suspicious, he even had several employees pretend to be kindergarten teachers. Ethan said he was the person in charge of this training. Grace immediately felt inexplicably proud. So Mr. Blackwood works in such an amazing company. Grace's casual remark made Ethan breathe easier, but he remained humble verbally. No, Gracie is the impressive one. In the following days, Ethan took care of Grace in every way. As they interacted more, Grace discovered Ethan's ability was much stronger than she imagined. A week later, Grace already regarded him as a male god. On the last day in Capital City, Ethan took Grace to eat at a private restaurant he frequented. That shop was in a very hidden alley. The storefront looked extremely small, but once inside, it was a different world. It was Grace's first time visiting such a shop after losing her memory, so she exclaimed in surprise. Ethan just felt Grace was very cute like this, with nothing inappropriate. Seeing Grace's country bumpkin appearance, several waiters came up to greet them with a very professional attitude. Conversely, a group of young people who had finished eating saw Grace's appearance. Several women dressed flamboyantly sneered and said contemptuously, "Country bumpkin." Ethan's face instantly darkened. Ethan glanced to the side. Those women were dressed like internet influencers, but the young men with them were not simple. There were two whom Ethan had dealt with before. Those two were thorough hedonistic rich kids. One bullied others relying on his family's name, and the other's father was the general manager of a listed company while his mother was a star. They were incredibly arrogant. In the capital city social circle, the reputation of these two was extremely bad. Grace had no reaction to those women's words. Tugging at Ethan's sleeve, she asked, "Ethan, what is that?" Ethan followed Grace's gaze. It was just a huge pixie sculpture. That is. Yo, isn't this the eldest young master of the Blackwood family? Ethan was just about to explain when a sharp male voice suddenly intervened. Grace followed the voice and saw a young man who looked no more than 20. But he was extremely arrogant, his eyes full of disdain and provocation. Long time no see, Ethan's eyes darkened. This brat had often troubled him at various banquets before. He didn't expect to meet him today. "The chick you brought today isn't great. She can't even compare to your ex-wife." Previously, when Grace was still dating Ethan, Ethan had taken Grace to attend several banquets. This brat had seen her from afar and even wanted to snatch her from Ethan. Now that Grace had taken off her fancy clothes and wasn't wearing makeup, plus the dim lighting, it was understandable he didn't recognize her. Ethan breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. If this brat recognized her, he would be in trouble. "None of your business?" Ethan looked at him coldly and wanted to hold Grace's hand to leave. Who knew the other slightly older man would reach out to block them, speaking in a sleazy manner, "Wait, Mr. Blackwood, why the rush? We finally met, let's go have some fun." The fun in their mouths was nothing more than clubbing, nightclubs, and drag racing. Ethan found them annoying just looking at them. He lowered his voice, leaned close to him, his eyes slightly fierce. "I heard you hit and killed someone the day before yesterday. Used money to suppress it?" The two young men's expressions panicked for a second, but then they looked indifferent again. "So what, Mr. Blackwood, don't forget, we also have leverage on you," Ethan sneered. "My leverage? You mean the matter of the Blackwood CEO cheating within marriage or being cuckolded by a mistress?" Ethan took a step back. Grace was present. He didn't want to use business tactics to scare her, only giving these two a slight warning. "If you want to oppose me, go back and ask your parents first." Ethan said the last words extremely lightly, but the two young men coincidentally felt a chill down their spines and were actually intimidated. "Let's go." Ethan turned back and gently held Grace's hand. Grace was a bit strange. "Why are they so afraid of you?" Those two didn't look like kind people. Who exactly was Ethan? Ethan actually tilted his head and thought very seriously for a moment, as if he didn't know either. "Maybe because I'm more handsome than them, so they got scared?" His act of being cute was completely out of place with the usual feeling he gave people. That contrast made Grace burst out laughing. The next second, Ethan pressed against Grace's ear. "So, do you want to consider being with me?" Whether it was the moonlight being too beautiful, or Ethan's smile being too charming, Or perhaps the wine she drank a month ago hadn't worn off yet. Grace stared blankly at Ethan and said, "Okay." When she reacted again, she was already tightly hugged by Ethan. When the two returned to the small town, they looked just like a couple in a passionate relationship. Ethan picked Grace up from work every day. After a while, the whole kindergarten knew Grace had a boyfriend. And a handsome, rich boyfriend. Even the kids in the kindergarten would run over after class to ask her, "Miss Green, is your boyfriend super handsome?" "Definitely not as handsome as me. I've seen Miss Green's boyfriend. He is the eyes tall." A little girl exaggeratedly gestured with both hands to the greatest height she could reach. Grace was still a bit uncomfortable talking about her romance in front of children, so she changed the topic. Just as she was about to get off work, Xander sent a message. "Gracie, I'm almost home." Xander had said he was going on a business trip for a month. Unexpectedly, the time was extended. Grace hadn't seen Xander for a long time. Saying she didn't miss him would be a lie. That night, when Xander and Grace were having dinner, Grace pretended to be mysterious and said she had a boyfriend. Xander was somewhat surprised. He still remembered clearly how Grace avoided strange men before. How could she find a new boyfriend just over a month after he went on a business trip? Xander couldn't explain clearly now whether he liked Grace romantically or cared for her like a sister. He just hoped she could be happy. So when Grace brought Ethan and told Xander this was her boyfriend, Xander's mind went blank, turning into a paste. "Doc Stone, Doc Stone," Grace called several times before Xander came back to his senses. In an instant, his brain throbbed with swelling pain. How could it be Ethan Blackwood? Or rather, how did Ethan find Grace? Too many questions and shocks piled up in Xander's heart, but he couldn't say them out loud. Looking at the expectant look Grace gave him, and her sweet, shy appearance when looking at Ethan, Xander only felt his throat go dry. "This is Ethan Blackwood." Grace pulled Ethan over and said to Xander, then turned to Ethan, "That is my brother Xander Stone." Grace was exactly like a young girl experiencing first love, shy, nervous, sweet, holding back smiles to pretend to be serious. Everything was written clearly on her face. It was the first time Xander had seen Grace like this, innocent and simple. Ethan extended his hand first. "Brother Xander, hello." He emphasized the word brother, but his face wore a polite and distant smile. Seeing Xander delaying to shake hands, Grace looked at Xander with some panic. Xander looked at Ethan expressionlessly, turned his head, pulled Grace over and said, "You can't be with him." "Why?" Xander gritted his teeth. He couldn't possibly say it was because of Ethan that she lost her memory, right? "Anyway, it's just no." Grace's face instantly turned pale, and she choked up. "I don't want to." Ethan felt sorry for Grace and looked at Xander meaningfully. "Why?" Xander took a step forward to shield Grace, as if Ethan were some terrible creature. "You ask why, Mr. Blackwood?" Thinking of the harm Grace suffered before, Xander had the mind to eat Ethan alive. Being able to stand here properly and talk to him now was already the greatest mercy. "Doc Stone," Grace forcefully pried open Xander's hand, gripping her. "I'm not a child, don't I even have the qualification to fall in love? It's not that you don't, it's what? Is it that you have always had a crush on her, approached her under the guise of taking care of her, yet didn't clarify things, and silently removed anyone around her who threatened you?" Ethan stared sharply at Xander, the corner of his mouth raised frivolously, full of sarcasm. Grace had always treated Xander as a brother. If she knew her brother liked her, wouldn't that be a distorted feeling? Xander opened his mouth, but no words came out. He didn't know how to refute. "Is it really like that?" Grace felt the temperature of her whole body rapidly recede in an instant, breaking out in a cold sweat. "Doc Stone, I always treated you as..." Hearing these familiar words, Xander couldn't bear it anymore, as if returning to a year ago when he bitterly crushed on Grace. This man is a devil." Xander's eyes were bloodshot as he pointed at Ethan's nose and cursed. "If you want to be with him, then don't acknowledge me as your brother." Xander turned and left after speaking. Grace stood in place, at a loss. She didn't know why. Why did Xander oppose her and Ethan so much? Why was he so angry? Why did the two of them seem to be in a hostile state from the beginning? Why? Ethan stepped forward, somewhat afraid to look at Grace's expression. "Sorry, I messed everything up." Grace suddenly felt difficult to breathe, her head splitting with pain. She couldn't help squatting on the ground. "Gracie, are you okay?" Ethan quickly squatted down and pulled Grace into his arms. Grace shook her head. "I often get headaches and feel nauseous. It will be fine in a while." Ethan didn't know if this was a sequela of amnesia and dared not ask, so he quietly waited for Grace to recover. After a good while, Grace spoke up and asked, "Ethan, can I live at your place for this period?" Ethan was delighted. Was Grace choosing him? Okay, good. The place Ethan lived was by the water. It was a new residential area, and the furniture inside was brand new, looking devoid of any life. No wonder he ran to her place every day. Grace couldn't help feeling a bit sorry for him. Although the two were considered cohabiting, Ethan was very disciplined and honest. Every day before going to bed, he kissed Grace lightly on the forehead, then covered himself with the quilt and slept obediently. Grace asked Xander every day why he wouldn't let her be with Ethan. Xander always replied with the same sentence, "It's either him or me." Grace even asked Xander to meet once, but Xander's attitude remained very tough. Even Grace's tears didn't make him waver in the slightest. Xander looked at Grace's retreating back, deep in thought. "Gracie, you have already died once because of that man. In this rebirth, I won't let him ruin your life again in the future. Perhaps when you recover your memory, you will understand me." However, Xander really hadn't expected that in just a few short days, Grace had already fallen deeply in love with Ethan. Could it be that Ethan was really an inescapable tribulation in Grace's life? Xander slowly clenched his fists. When Ethan received Xander's call, he wasn't surprised at all. He had watched Grace looking preoccupied these days without saying anything. He hoped Grace could solve it herself instead of him threatening Xander. The two agreed to meet on the hotel rooftop. When Ethan arrived, Xander had long been waiting there. "Dr. Stone, I wonder what business you have with me?" Ethan crossed his legs elegantly, rarely putting away his hostility toward Xander. "Leave Grace," Xander said straight to the point. Ethan's expression changed slightly for a moment, then returned to normal. "And if I say no?" He had found Grace with great difficulty. Spending 365 days and so much effort, how could he leave just because he said so? Xander had expected him to say this and wasn't surprised at all. "If Mr. Blackwood insists on not leaving, have you thought about what if Grace recovers her memory? Do you think she will forgive you?" Hiding his identity, approaching Grace, making her fall in love with him again, Ethan clearly knew everything, but told Grace nothing. This sounded like a hurtful scam. If Grace really recovered her memory, she would probably never want to see Ethan again. "I can make her never remember." Ethan's hand trembled uncontrollably. Thinking of that result, if Grace was disappointed in him again. Xander stood up abruptly, almost leaving in anger. "Ethan Blackwood, are you leaving or not?" Ethan replied with a firm gaze. "Since you are unwilling to leave on your own, I will force you to leave. I will tell her everything you once did to Grace. By then, it won't be you leaving on your own accord. Are you threatening me?" "So what?" The scene of two men of extraordinary bearing arguing loudly attracted many sidelong glances. Xander looked around, his arrogance diminished slightly. He sat down and looked at Ethan coldly. "If you don't believe me, try it." Ethan's fist clenched and unclenched, tight then loose. "I promise you I will leave Grace." That evening, Grace didn't wait for Ethan at the door. When she called his phone, the mechanical female voice coldly said, "The number you dialed does not exist." Does not exist? Grace began to panic. An unease she had never felt before spread in her heart. She sent messages to Ethan, but the other party had already blocked her. Grace's brain completely stopped working. She didn't know why it was suddenly like this, but she still held on to luck in her heart, thinking maybe Ethan changed his phone number and didn't have time to tell her. Maybe his WeChat was hacked, but Grace had seen Ethan working. He was so busy, and there were hundreds if not thousands of numbers stored in his phone. Why would he change his number suddenly? The possibility of being hacked was greater. Right, it must be so. Grace endured it and took a taxi to Ethan's apartment. She trembled as she pressed the code to open the door, but she pressed it wrong time and time again. Finally, the electronic lock automatically closed. Grace went to feel for the key in her bag. However, the key wouldn't listen to her no matter what. It seemed that as soon as Ethan broke his promise, her key and his lock also lost contact. Grace was so anxious she was about to cry. She sadly discovered that her key couldn't insert into the lock hole at all. How could this be? Grace's face was flushed with anxiety, sweat constantly appearing on her palms. It was the beginning of spring, yet she felt like she was in the polar winter. "I beg you, go in quickly." The unease and anxiety in her heart spread and accumulated. Grace's tears couldn't be held back anymore, falling in big drops. Did Ethan not want her anymore? Why break up with her suddenly? How could he not even say a word? Grace had almost no strength to stand. She collapsed softly on the ground, crying like a child who couldn't get what they wanted. She tried to unlock the door undyingly, failing again and again, probing once more. In the end, she simply threw the key away and dialed Ethan's phone over and over. The female voice repeated again and again. Grace cried and thought maybe she remembered Ethan's phone number wrong, even though she had just called him the day before yesterday. Maybe the third digit was wrong. Grace tried from 1 to 9. It connected, but it wasn't Ethan's voice. Hang up, start over. When she tried the last digit, Grace couldn't bear it anymore. She threw the phone aside, hugged herself, and cried loudly. Why was it like this? "Ethan, where are you?" "Ethan," someone called property management, and a security guard came up to ask Grace what happened. Grace sobbed and couldn't speak. Seeing her sitting at the door of 701, the security guard thought she was looking for someone. "Miss, are you mistaken? The family in this unit just moved out today." "What?" Grace looked up, her face covered in tear stains. "I heard this house was bought less than 2 months ago, and they only lived here for a few days. They moved out today. Miss, what's wrong?" Seeing Grace faint directly, the security guard was terrified and quickly called an ambulance. Grace developed a high fever deep in the night at the hospital. She kept repeating the same dream. She dreamed she was constantly opening the door, knocking on the door at Ethan's house. Finally, that door turned into a monster's bloody mouth and swallowed her directly. Tears flowed continuously from her tightly closed eyes. In the end, she cried out in her dream. Xander was startled. "Gracie, Gracie! Ethan, Ethan, save me quickly. Ethan, don't leave me." Grace cried and shouted, "Ethan Blackwood, come back." The scene in the dream was too real, and Grace's wailing was incredibly moving. Xander felt bitter beyond words. He threatened Ethan to leave only because he felt this was better for Grace. "Just endure a little longer, Gracie. Once you get through it, it will be fine." Grace seemed confined to the spot by a huge cage, waving her hands wildly in the air. After a struggle, she suddenly woke up with a start. In the last repetition, Ethan appeared, but he killed her with his own hands. Grace was drenched in sweat, tears streaming down. She hugged her head tightly in self-protection and cried in a voice as quiet as a mosquito. "Gracie, are you okay?" Xander turned on the light. Seeing Grace's appearance, he was stunned. He had never seen Grace look so helpless and sad. Seeing it was Xander, Grace immediately cried even more aggrievedly. "Doc Stone, Ethan is gone. He doesn't want me anymore. I feel so terrible. Why did he disappear suddenly? I went to his house to find him, but he had moved away." Grace was like a drowning person grasping a piece of driftwood, venting all her grievances. "He even blocked me. Doc Stone, do you think he was kidnapped?" Grace looked at Xander with bright eyes like a guiding light in a dark forest, but Xander had to shatter that lamp. "Gracie, I told you long ago, Ethan Blackwood is a heartless person. He isn't worth your love, but was it really so?" Grace looked through teary eyes. She wasn't willing to believe it. She recalled everything about meeting, knowing, and falling in love with Ethan. Her heart ached more and more, throbbing painfully. It was terribly uncomfortable. That feeling of suffocation swept over her again. Grace gasped for large breaths of air. The sound of sobbing mixed with heavy breathing was truly heartbreaking. "I don't want to," Grace said. "Even if he really is that kind of person, I want him to admit it personally. Otherwise, I won't believe it even if I die." As soon as her voice fell, a noise suddenly came from outside the ward, as if someone kicked something over. "I'll go out and look." Xander tucked the corner of the quilt for Grace and got up to leave the room. It was deep into the night. Except for nurses, no one would be wandering in the corridor. The flower bed at the door had been kicked over by someone. Soil spilled out, scattered all over the ground, and outside the door it was empty. Ethan returned to his car, panting heavily. He took a deep breath, released the handbrake, expertly shifted gears, stepped on the gas, and drove out of the hospital parking lot. The small town late at night was like a ghost town. Ethan ignored red lights all the way, speeding to Grace's door. He sat downstairs at Grace's place all night, then got out of the car and walked in. He hadn't left Grace's side. After talking with Xander that day, he began to withdraw himself from Grace's life. But he really couldn't bear to part, so he bought another apartment in Grace's complex at double the price. When Grace got off work, he actually watched her from afar, hiding behind a big tree. He watched Grace's expression go from doubt to bored waiting, then later to disappointment and panic, and finally near collapse. Countless times he wanted to rush out and tell Grace, to hell with Xander. He didn't want to care anymore, but reason told him that Grace couldn't know the truth right now, perhaps never. Ethan followed the taxi Grace took, watching her arrive at her own home, go upstairs, and repeatedly try to unlock the door. Only then did she really know she had lost Ethan. Grace collapsed on the floor, crying without caring about her image. Ethan stood in the fire escape, his heart twisting like a knife. Later, Grace fainted. Ethan pushed aside the security guard and sent her to the hospital immediately. Only after confirming Grace was fine did he have the hospital contact Grace. But he had the doctor hide his existence. This might be to repay the mistakes he committed. Ethan smiled self-mockingly, sat in the study, took out letter paper, and began to write seriously. Grace remained listless, mentally absent, shedding tears from time to time. Xander couldn't ask for leave every day to stay by her side, so he had to ask a nurse he knew well. Grace refused to be discharged. She directly asked for half a month's leave from the kindergarten. She also refused IV drips and refused to take medicine. It was useless for Xander to scold her or coax her. "I think I'm fine. I'm not sick. I'm just injured." Grace buried herself under the quilt, tears sliding down silently. Seeing Grace like this, Xander felt terrible. Grace couldn't eat anything and lost a size in just a few days. Ethan kept an eye on Grace's condition. Seeing her like this naturally broke his heart. "Xander Stone, what exactly are you doing?" Ethan scolded Xander over the phone. "You said you would take good care of Gracie. Is this how you take care of her?" Xander had just finished a day's work. Before he even had time to take off his white coat, he was scolded by Ethan, making his mood even worse. "Ethan Blackwood, you speak lightly. Do I want Gracie to be like this?" Xander was also worried about Grace, anxious that she wasn't eating or sleeping well. "This is just temporary. Once she gets over it, it will be fine. She will slowly forget you. Then start a new life with anyone but Ethan Blackwood." The other end of the phone fell silent. Xander thought there was a signal problem. He said hello several times, only not hanging up after hearing the other party's breathing. After an unknown amount of time, an unusual sound seemed to come from the other end. Was Ethan choking up? A man bleeds and sweats but doesn't shed tears. Especially Ethan Blackwood. But now, was he sad to this extent because of Grace? "I want to see her," Ethan said. "No," Xander refused without hesitation. Ethan sighed and took another step back. "I'll go in after she falls asleep. I won't let her know it's me. If you are still worried, you can stand outside the door." With words coming to this, no matter how reluctant Xander was, he had to agree. But ultimately, he wasn't despicable enough to really stand outside the door and spy on them. That night, Ethan quietly walked into Grace's ward. Grace was fast asleep, but she wasn't sleeping peacefully. It seemed she was having a nightmare again, frowning tightly, showing a frightened expression from time to time. Ethan's heart clenched watching her. He gently tried to smooth the frown between Grace's brows. Grace muttered unclearly, turned over, and faced Ethan. Having not seen her for just a few days, Grace's face had lost a lot of weight. Ethan sat by her bed, took her hand, kissed it, then the top of her head, forehead, and nose tip. Ethan placed a letter by her pillow. "Gracie, I came to see you." Ethan spoke, his throat dry, suddenly feeling a bit awkward. Grace let out a soft snore, like a little piglet. Ethan loved this look of hers dearly. "You don't know how much I love you," Ethan continued. "Actually, I fell in love with you at first sight the first day we met. Although you always said I was very aloof, you didn't know how nervous I was that day. I hesitated for a whole half-month before deciding to approach you, then pursue you, and confess to you." While recalling, Ethan brushed away the stray hair on Grace's face. "Actually, we have always loved each other very much. I didn't cheat. Sharon Summers was someone I specifically found to make you angry. Because of grandfather's matter, I always thought you did it on purpose. But later, I saw the letter you wrote to me, and I knew how stupid I used to be." The more Ethan spoke, the more uncomfortable he felt. He smiled self-mockingly. "Whatever I do for you, even if I spend this life repenting, I can't make up for it, right? Maybe Xander really is right. If I stay away from you, it's better for everyone. You can forget the pain and have a better future. I will always guard by your side. If you get a boyfriend in the future, and he can't even compare to me, I definitely won't agree to you being together," Ethan said with a bitter smile, his eyes moist. "Although my agreement is useless, you must keep your eyes open in the future. Don't find someone like me." Grace Green is a very, very good girl, but Ethan Blackwood is a very, very bad man. "I love you, Gracie. Goodbye." Ethan kissed Grace's slightly parted lips, turned, and was about to leave. Unexpectedly, Grace on the hospital bed suddenly called out softly, "Ethan, Ethan, don't leave me." Ethan looked back. Grace was having a nightmare again. She was crying and begging the Ethan in her dream not to leave, but that retreating figure showed how determined he was. "Don't go," Grace cried, sweating all over. "I beg you. I really love you." Softly, the sound of the door closing was heard. Ethan hardened his heart and deleted Xander's contact information as well. From now on, he and Grace really had no relationship anymore. No, suddenly, as if having a premonition, Grace woke up with a start, screaming out loud. Coming back to her senses and realizing she was still in the ward, she couldn't help having lingering fears about the dream just now. Grace smiled bitterly. It seemed she would have to wash another set of pajamas tomorrow. Grace wanted to get out of bed to get some air, but as she reached out, she touched something made of paper. It was a letter. When Xander came to the hospital, Grace was already up and packing things. "Doc Stone, you're here." Grace turned and saw Xander smiling. "I want to be discharged today." Grace's face was somewhat pale, revealing some fatigue, but her voice was full of vitality. "Gracie," Xander asked worriedly, "are you okay? How come Ethan just saw Grace yesterday, and today she wanted to be discharged and looked as if she had moved on?" Hearing this, Grace gave Xander a strange look and laughed. "What's going on, Doc Stone? Why would something be wrong with me?" Grace packed her things very quickly. Let's go handle the discharge procedures." Xander hadn't figured out what was happening before being dragged forward by Grace. He watched confusedly as Grace skillfully went through the discharge process. When they returned home, Xander finally reacted. Grace walked excitedly toward her room while saying cheerfully, "I stayed in the hospital too long. I forgot what home looks like." Grace put her things on the floor and closed the bedroom door. "I'll change clothes first," Xander answered with a rasp. "Okay." No matter what, it was good that Grace was happy now. Grace changed into casual clothes and came out to eat, but after a few bites, she said she was full and went asleep for a while. As soon as Grace closed the door, she couldn't hold back anymore and burst into tears. She had been pretending just now, pretending she was already fine, but it didn't even take the time of a meal for her to realize she couldn't do it. She couldn't fool herself at all. On the first day, Grace pretended she was happy and had forgotten everything. On the second day, Grace decided to go to work normally, forgetting she was pretending while interacting with the children. On the third day, it was Friday. Grace felt as tired as if she had worked continuously for a month. On the fourth day, Grace went to work with 2 big dark circles under her eyes, having no mind to play with the kids. On the fifth day, Grace rested. She ran alone to the riverside to listen to the sound of the river, sitting there for a whole day. The 6th day, the 7th day, the 8th day, Grace seemed to have really forgotten Ethan, as if that sweet month or so was just a long dream. Then one day after school, a child asked her, "Miss Green, why doesn't your boyfriend come anymore?" In an instant, Grace felt as if someone had forcibly ripped off her fig leaf. Her tears rushed out impatiently. Yes, where was her boyfriend? The child was scared by Grace's appearance, standing there dumbfounded, afraid to move. Grace suddenly felt all strength drained from her body. She wanted to go home, wrap herself up, and cry her heart out. If only this could make her forget Ethan, that would be great. But she couldn't. It turned out she had always deeply loved Ethan. She had deceived herself for a full 3 months. She endured for 3 months, failing to boil everything between her and Ethan into syrup. Instead, it became thicker and more bitter, turning into a heart-punishing snake gall lodged in Grace's chest. Too bitter, but she couldn't spit it out nor swallow it down. Grace tried to escape, but instead, she sank deeper and deeper. She didn't want to be like this anymore. She was tired. After work, Grace went to the original vendor to buy vegetables. Just a few months ago, Ethan had stood there and found her. Walking home along the vegetable buying route, Ethan used to carry vegetables in one hand and hold Grace's hand in the other every day, walking back slowly. In the coffee shop on the street corner, they would go sit every other weekend. Ethan worked on his computer, and Grace watched him by his side. When Ethan felt uncomfortable being watched, he would turn his head and kiss her. And Grace's home. The new slippers bought for Ethan were still in the shoe cabinet. Ethan had touched every inch of the pots and pans in the kitchen. They nestled on the sofa together to watch TV. If it got late, Ethan slept in Grace's room. Even the clothes Grace wore every day had Ethan's scent. Every corner of Grace's life was filled with Ethan. After throwing away these external things, every cell in Grace's body also housed Ethan. Grace couldn't forget Ethan, unless she died. Grace went home and cried loudly. When Xander got off work, she was carrying a suitcase saying she was going on a long trip. Xander asked her what she was going to do. "I'm going to find that bastard Ethan Blackwood." Grace gritted her teeth and said, "Xander, don't stop me." Xander had seen everything about Grace these days. At night when he got up to use the bathroom, he heard Grace crying in her room, covering her mouth so cautiously, for fear that sadness would escape through the gaps in her fingers and drill into Xander's ears. Xander listened silently to the choked, intermittent sobbing. He wanted to push the door open, but put his hand down again. He asked himself countless times, was doing this right or wrong? Why did Grace seem even more painful? In the end, he didn't know if Grace fell asleep from exhaustion or from crying. "Okay," Xander heard himself say. Ethan had once said he was from the headquarters of that large corporation in the capital. Grace decided to go to that corporation to find Ethan. Grace booked a late-night flight ticket. After arriving in Capital City, she first checked the information of that corporation, only to discover that this corporation was much more powerful than she imagined. Early the next morning, Grace rarely put on full makeup and went to the first ring road to find that corporation with her bag on her back. However, she was dumbfounded as soon as she entered the corporation because it was simply too big. She asked security and learned that it was divided into 4 parts. In other words, all the skyscrapers here belonged to this corporation. Without an employee ID, Grace couldn't get in at all. Grace didn't expect it to be like this. Discouraged, she sat at the entrance of one of the buildings. Ethan had just returned to Capital City from the small town. He held 3 consecutive meetings and was physically and mentally exhausted. A bunch of people surrounded him as he walked out of the building. He saw Grace sitting at the entrance at a glance. He immediately froze there. Gracie. Why was she here? Seeing Ethan freeze and not move, the people around him called out, "President Blackwood! President Blackwood!" Ethan came back to his senses. What's wrong?" That person followed Ethan's gaze and found a woman sitting on the steps. Probably someone who failed a job application. He carefully chose his words. "President Blackwood, do you need to personally see her?" Ethan pondered for a moment. "No. Go ask her what she wants to do, then follow her instructions." Ethan finished speaking and turned a corner, leaving in the opposite direction of Grace. That person wondered who this woman was to Ethan. Could it be a love debt owed outside? So, was the rumor true that he recently had a new love from the countryside? And this new love came to the capital to find him? A big drama instantly rehearsed in his brain, molding Grace into a strong, hardworking poor girl, while Ethan only had a fling with her. They met on some mountaintop. The poor girl fell in love with Ethan immediately, getting pregnant and having a child for him, while Ethan got tired of the poor girl and abandoned her resolutely. Thinking this, he stepped forward and asked, "Miss, what are you doing here?" Grace was distressed about how to get in. Suddenly seeing a man lean over, thinking he wanted to chase her away, she quickly said, "I'm just sitting here." "Miss, I know who you are. Just tell me honestly, what exactly do you want to do?" Seeing this person's certain appearance, Grace thought he was Ethan's colleague and Ethan had mentioned her to him. She asked busily, "Then have you seen Ethan Blackwood? I heard he works here." Sure enough, she came to find President Blackwood. Seeing his guess was correct, he secretly cursed Ethan for being a scumbag in his heart. "He does work here." Grace's eyes lit up. "Then can I go in to find him? Just for a few minutes you can follow me too." The previous security guard wouldn't let her in no matter how long Grace pestered him. Finding someone willing to take her in with great difficulty, Grace grabbed onto him firmly. The interior of the building was actually bigger than the outside. Grace couldn't help opening her eyes wide, marveling at everything. Seeing this, that person was even more sure of his guess and felt a little sympathy for this unfortunate rural girl. "Thank you, I'll go find him myself." Grace was extremely happy. She turned back to say a word to him and ran straight to the front desk. He sighed. "Little girl, wanting to see President Blackwood, how could it be so easy?" The receptionist told her in a polite but unrefusable tone, "Sorry, miss, external personnel are not allowed to enter. Please leave." Grace became anxious. "Someone brought me in, and I'm just here to find someone. I'll leave as soon as I see him. I won't delay for a second." The receptionist showed a standard smile, her voice without a trace of fluctuation. "Sorry, miss, external personnel are not allowed to enter. If you don't leave, I will call security." Hearing she was going to call security, Grace stopped her hurriedly. "Then how about this? Just help me contact one person, let me know he is here, okay?" The receptionist maintained her smile. Just as she was about to speak, Grace begged and pleaded, even taking out a stack of cash trying to bribe her. The receptionist turned pale with fright and quickly pushed the money back. There were cameras monitoring here 24 hours a day. "Miss, don't be like this." "I'll tell you," Grace was satisfied after hearing this, putting the money leisurely back into her bag. "Wouldn't it have been better if you did this earlier?" When looking up information last night, she found that the corporation's internal management was strictly regulated. Any employee accepting bribes, no matter how much, would be fired immediately. This was why this corporation could become so big and successful. "Speak, who do you want to find?" Grace lay on the marble table, looking at the receptionist with bright eyes. "I want to find Ethan Blackwood." The receptionist's hand operating the computer paused abruptly. "Excuse me, miss, who are you looking for?" "Ethan Blackwood." Grace feared she wouldn't understand, and even typed out the name on her phone. Just this name. The receptionist was very certain that there was only one Ethan Blackwood in the entire corporation. "Sorry, miss. Without an appointment and introduction by special personnel, you cannot see President Blackwood." The corner of Grace's mouth twitched. She didn't expect meeting Ethan to be so difficult. "Why? Is Ethan Blackwood your company's treasure or something?" Grace mumbled, putting away her phone. "Why is it so hard to see an employee? Your corporation is too excessive, employee. Ethan Blackwood." The receptionist smiled awkwardly but politely. "Miss, Mr. Blackwood is the president of our corporation. Naturally, he isn't someone you can see just because you want to." Grace's hand paused in midair. What did she say? Ethan was the president of this corporation. In other words, the entire corporation was his. And not just the person in charge of an area. In other words, Ethan lied to her. Grace didn't know how she walked out of the corporation's gate or how she returned to the hotel. Right, she only focused on checking this corporation yesterday, but didn't pay attention to who the corporation's president was. The internet was overwhelmingly full of Ethan's photos, information, achievements. Once Grace searched the 3 words, Ethan Blackwood, online, there were more than 30 million results. Ethan's romantic anecdotes alone occupied half the quantity. Besides gossip with various stars and socialites, the most discussed was the matter of Ethan and his ex-wife. Regarding Ethan's ex-wife, there were all kinds of speculations. A bankrupt rich girl, a hidden tycoon's daughter, an ordinary but beautiful girl, etc. The more Grace read, the colder her heart became. Why had Ethan never mentioned to her that he had been married? Moreover, according to these materials, Ethan's ex-wife was already dead. The cause of death was dystocia. However, the farce in the hospital was embellished by people, turning into Ethan being promiscuous outside, the legal wife keeping an empty room alone, leading to miscarriage due to depression. Finally, she was sent to the hospital by a man, but Ethan didn't want his ex-wife to undergo surgery. He wholeheartedly wanted her dead. There were very few photos of Ethan's ex-wife online. What reporters captured were just her back views, mostly at the door of Ethan's company. But another woman appeared frequently beside Ethan. That woman wore exquisite makeup, looked bright and bewitching, and behaved very intimately with Ethan. Based on these, Ethan had confirmed his infidelity. Grace looked at that woman's face. She was clearly smiling, but Grace felt she was so scary. Her eyes were full of ferocity, like a sharp knife. Grace broke out in a cold sweat and slammed the computer shut. Why did she always feel this woman seemed familiar? Ah! Grace's head suddenly hurt unusually. This pain was different from before, as if countless small needles were piercing her brain. Fragmented segments flashed before her eyes. Grace closed her eyes in pain, and those segments drilled out from the depths of her mind again. Grace wanted to catch a fragment, but they were too fast. Continuously different scenes appeared. She couldn't catch a single one. The headache got worse. Bean-sized beads of sweat appeared on Grace's forehead, her back covered in cold sweat, wetting her clothes. What exactly was it? Grace gritted her teeth to endure this strong pain. By the time she had consciousness, she was numb. Grace was too tired. She collapsed on the bed and fell asleep covered in sweat. She dreamed of Ethan, but this time it wasn't Ethan parting from her. She saw herself lying in a basement. Two men threw her directly onto the dusty and filthy floor. Grace seemed to have an injury on her arm, wrapped in gauze, and those two men stuffed a piece of broken porcelain directly into Grace's injured arm. Just dreaming of seeing this scene, Grace sweated from pain. What was this? Her past memories? The scene changed. Ethan grabbed Grace's arm and threw her onto the bed. Gauze was wrapped around Grace's arm. Fresh blood seeped out from it again, staining the bed sheet red. Grace woke up from the dream with a start. Did she know Ethan before? Or could it be that she and Ethan were originally underground lovers? Grace had a splitting headache. She covered her head, so painful she couldn't even make a sound. She could only open her mouth wide, screaming with her throat, but there was no sound. Why was it like this? Why did Ethan lie to her? Why exactly did she lose her memory? Who exactly was Ethan? All of this, why? Tears fell drop by drop onto the bed sheet. The surroundings were too quiet. The sound of tears falling was clearly discernible. Grace looked at the room where she couldn't see her fingers. She suddenly felt that this midsummer night had never been so cold. She didn't want to stay alone. Grace was like a shell that had lost its soul, wearing human clothes, wandering back and forth on the street. Are those scenes of people coming and going, heavy traffic, real? Grace didn't know. She felt she was locked in a glass bottle, and inside the bottle, there was only her. She could see everything outside, but couldn't touch anyone. Only she remained in the whole world. Grace walked forward numbly. Meeting a group of high school students who finished evening self-study, someone accidentally bumped into her and apologized, "Sorry, classmate." Only after they walked far away did Grace seem to wake up, saying slowly, "I'm not a classmate." The high school students in front paused for a moment, then burst into laughter. Grace sighed and hailed a taxi. "Just drive me around casually." The driver had met all kinds of strange customers, so he took Grace around Zidden for a circle. Grace checked the time. It was only past 10:30. Go around again. The driver was naturally willing, taking her back again. The driver asked Grace, "Little girl, are you heartbroken?" Heartbroken? Grace smiled. She was probably worse than heartbroken. At least when heartbroken, the other party loved you. But what about Ethan? Yes, Grace opened her mouth with difficulty. Her voice was hoarser than ever, as if she hadn't spoken for years. Driver, how did you know? Hey, I've been driving a taxi for years. What haven't I encountered? Following that, the driver enlightened Grace to be more open-minded. Things like there are plenty of fish in the sea. Don't give up the whole forest for a single leaf. Grace wasn't a person who loved to argue, but hearing the driver's words made her uncomfortable all over. She said, "Then what if that leaf is gold and the whole forest has been cut down?" "Aye, little girl, you can't say that." The driver was somewhat embarrassed. The two fell into silence after saying a few more sentences. Suddenly, Grace saw a group of people coming out of a magnificent hotel. She recognized one of them. It was one of the two young men Ethan took her to eat with in Capital City that day. It happened to be a red light ahead, and vehicles lined up in a long queue. The place the driver stopped allowed Grace to clearly see everything at the hotel entrance. After more than 10 seconds, another wave of people came out. One of them was tall and had an extraordinary temperament, allowing Grace to see him at a glance. It was Ethan. "Ethan," Grace shouted and opened the door directly to run out of the car. "Hey, miss, you can't get off here." The driver stuck his head out and shouted, "You haven't paid yet." Grace quickly took out a $100 bill from her wallet. "Keep the change." She threw the money at the window, then ran toward Ethan without looking back. Beep, beep. Vehicles on the right suddenly saw a woman run out, frightened into slamming on brakes and honking horns wildly. Many people stuck their heads out to curse. "Are you crazy? Are you blind?" Grace couldn't hear anything. Tears blurred her vision. Gradually, she couldn't see Ethan's figure clearly. Grace raised her hand and wiped her eyes fiercely. When her vision recovered, Ethan was gone. Grace instantly lost her spirit, looking left and right at the hotel entrance. No, Ethan. Her tear ducts ached again, tears gushing out. "Ethan Blackwood," Grace shouted. "Ethan Blackwood, come out." Grace stood on the sidewalk. Pedestrians all looked at her strangely. Passing motor vehicles sped past, grazing her. Some irritable people cursed loudly. "Ethan," Grace dragged a crying tone aggrievedly, "why don't you see me? Why? Don't want me anymore? I'm sorry." Ethan's voice suddenly came from behind. Grace turned back abruptly. Sure enough, it was Ethan. He was standing behind Grace looking at her. Seeing Grace's face full of sadness, he couldn't suppress himself anymore and hugged Grace into his arms. "I'm sorry, Gracie." The sobbing Grace had been holding back finally poured out completely in Ethan's arms. Ethan rubbed Grace's head very gently. "Good girl, don't cry, don't cry. I won't leave again, I'm sorry." He had been watching Grace these past few months. Seeing Grace gradually getting better, he thought Grace had completely let go of him. Ethan persuaded himself to learn to let go, letting Grace completely possess a new life without him. So he returned to Capital City. But he didn't expect to see Grace waiting bitterly for him at the entrance of his company. How he wished he could have hugged Grace in his arms then and there, letting her never leave. However, in a moment of distraction, he stifled his own thought, only asking a subordinate to ask what Grace came for. Hearing the subordinate's report, Ethan didn't dare to think Grace came for him. But tonight, seeing Grace rushing toward him regardless of everything, it seemed Ethan was Grace's whole world. All reason was completely lost. Ethan thought, let those scruples go to hell. As long as the person he held in his arms now was Grace, it was enough. Grace cried until Ethan's heart broke. His heart was also dripping blood. He shouldn't have listened to Xander. Leaving Grace, he discovered how difficult every day was. No matter what he did, he would think of Grace. He missed Grace so much he was going crazy. I'm sorry. What they didn't see was, at the hotel exit less than 100 meters away from them, someone saw all this clearly. Grace didn't think about what connection those dreams had with Ethan. She only knew she had found Ethan. The two returned to the Blackwood villa together that night. Grace didn't ask him why he lied to her, nor why he left suddenly. She was afraid if she asked, she would lose Ethan again. The two lived together, seemingly like before, but both knew in their hearts that some things were different from before. Grace lived in seclusion in the villa. She had resigned from her job at the kindergarten and turned to formally studying preschool education. There were quite a few medical books in Ethan's study, but most were very new. Grace remembered Ethan wasn't interested in medicine at all. Then these books. Grace looked at those brand new books, her eyes dimming. Probably belonged to Ethan's ex-wife, right? Grace was reading seriously in the flower room when a strange call came in. It was a Capital City number. Grace picked it up suspiciously. "Miss Green, I have some things here you should be very interested in. Want to talk?" "I'm not buying insurance." Grace hung up directly. That phone called again, seemingly somewhat angry from embarrassment. "I'm not selling insurance, it's about Ethan Blackwood. Do you want to listen?" Because it was about Ethan, Grace went skeptically. The person coming was the young man who had a conflict with Ethan before. Grace had also seen him once in front of the hotel. Although it was just a hurried glance, that head of red hair was unforgettable. "So it's you." Grace sat down opposite him. "My surname is Johnson, Jard Johnson. Nice to meet you, Miss Green." This person smiled very evilly, reaching out a hand trying to pretend to be a gentleman. However, in Grace's eyes, it was a poor imitation. Grace didn't reach out. "What purpose do you have looking for me?" This person definitely didn't have good intentions. Grace silently criticized him, deciding no matter what he said, she would treat it as a gust of wind, blowing past and forgetting it. Jard saw Grace being so aloof and couldn't help snorting in his heart. Just the same kind of trash as Ethan, however. Soon neither of you will have it easy thinking of his father's servile appearance the other day, being timid in front of Ethan, respectfully apologizing full of regret, saying his son was too incompetent and caused Ethan a lot of trouble. Thinking of his old man scolding him severely in front of the person he hated most, and slapping him in front of so many people, he was furious. Simply hated Ethan to the bone. I heard you are the little lover Ethan found from the countryside. Jard returned to his original hangdog appearance, looking at Grace sideways. Grace probably understood his meaning. This was to drive a wedge between her and Ethan. None of your business? Grace sneered. How you guys are indeed isn't my business, but… Jard suddenly leaned closer, saying mysteriously, don't you know Ethan has an ex-wife? Grace's pupils shrank suddenly. To be honest, she was very curious about Ethan's ex-wife, but since this person in front of her wanted to harm Ethan, how could she comply with his wishes? If you want to talk nonsense with me, then I'll leave first. Grace picked up her bag and wanted to leave. You look very much like her. Jard suddenly raised his voice. Grace instantly froze in place. Her? Ethan's ex-wife. Seeing Grace sit down again, Jard revealed a smile bound to win. They all say Ethan's ex-wife died, but Ethan has been looking for his wife this past year. Grace's hand, hidden under the table, clenched involuntarily, nails digging deep into her flesh. Later, he lived in a small town for a few months. Someone saw him being intimate with a woman, and that woman is you. Grace's face was pale, lips tightly closed, teeth beginning to chatter involuntarily. Seeing her like this, the other party felt much more comfortable in his heart. I heard his ex-wife looks very much like you. No, almost exactly the same. Moreover, his wife was also named Grace Green. Like a thunderbolt from a clear sky, Grace felt the whole world collapse. She was utterly defeated. Ethan's wife was Grace Green, and she was also named Grace Green. Grace trembled, barely maintaining her last trace of pride. What do you want to do telling me this? Jard laughed. He spent so much effort collecting information. He couldn't possibly let Grace pass it by so lightly, right? Nothing much, just chatting. He revealed white teeth, smiling, his eyes indifferent. I heard as soon as Ethan married his ex-wife, he found a mistress and even had an illegitimate child outside, Jard continued. He ignored the legal wife at home. With great difficulty, the wife got pregnant, yet she was killed by the mistress. But I heard Ethan was very tolerant of everything regarding that mistress. The wife died, yet he didn't say a word. Now thinking the wife didn't die, trying every possible way to find her, what do you say it's for? He leaned close to Grace, saying softly. That voice seemed to come from hell. Grace laughed. For what? Destroying criminal evidence, or continuing to play with her in the palm of his hand. After Jard left, Grace remained in her seat until the shop assistant asked her to leave. Only then did she realize it was completely dark. Ethan had called her an unknown number of times, WeChat messages numbered in the dozens. Grace looked at the phone flashing Ethan's number. She didn't know how to face Ethan. The call ended automatically. Then the phone screen went black, shutting down due to lack of power. Grace looked at the phone as if looking at herself. It rained in the sky. Drop by drop of water fell on the screen, like Grace's tears. Grace walked for nearly 3 hours, walking back to the Blackwood villa. Ethan wasn't home. The servant came up and asked anxiously, Miss Green, where did you go? The young master is worried to death, Miss Green. From the beginning when she moved in, the servants called her Miss Green. How ironic. Clearly she was Mrs. Blackwood, yet she became Miss Green who had no relationship with the Blackwood family. Grace suddenly laughed soundlessly, startling the servant. Miss Green, what's wrong with you? Go call Mr. Blackwood. Grace's vocal cords seemed broken, extremely rough. Just say I'm back. Grace lay on the bed like a corpse. If not for the rise and fall of her chest, probably one would suspect she was already dead. Ethan came back very quickly, running into Grace's bedroom like a gust of wind, somewhat angry. Where did you go? Why didn't you answer my calls or reply to my messages? Do you want to worry me to death? Seeing Grace didn't speak, as if he didn't exist at all, Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Gracie, what's wrong? Grace turned her head. Her face was gray-green, scary. Ethan didn't care about her not replying to his messages anymore, quickly stepping forward. Gracie, why do you look so bad? Grace didn't cry. When a person's heart dies, they won't cry. Ethan Blackwood, what exactly do you want to do? Grace held the edge of the bed and stood up. She hadn't eaten a grain of rice or drunk a drop of water since today. Her body was somewhat weak, but there was no thought of eating or drinking. Why did you lie to me? Ethan's unease was confirmed. Guilty, he didn't dare look into Grace's eyes. Gracie, listen to my explanation. I am serious about you. Really? Grace smiled bleakly. Serious? Serious enough to go out on dates with a mistress while I was pregnant. Serious enough to remain indifferent when she killed my child. Serious enough that I must tolerate your illegitimate child. Serious enough that you almost killed me. By the end of Grace's speech, her eyes were filled with bloodshot veins, looking very terrifying. You recovered your memory? Ethan had long prepared for this day. Since he decided to be with Grace forever, he wouldn't evade. Gracie, actually Sharon and I were just acting. I did it all to anger you and that. Shut up, Grace covered her ears, screaming out loud. Get out, I never want to see you again. Gracie, sorry, I really didn't expect. Grace pushed Ethan hard. Caught off guard, Ethan took 2 steps back. Grace seized the opportunity to run out. Gracie, Ethan tried to grab Grace, but only caught a piece of her clothing. Miss Green, a servant's exclamation suddenly came from downstairs. Ethan rushed out the door. Grace had fallen at the top of the stairs. What happened? Ethan went downstairs quickly, picked Grace up, and looked back, glaring at the servant. The servant waved her hands in fear, repeatedly saying, "It's none of my business. None of my business." Miss Green fainted halfway walking and fell down. Ethan gave the servant a fierce look, said no more, and carried Grace directly to the hospital. The doctor said Grace fainted suddenly due to anemia. She probably hadn't eaten anything today. Ethan guarded by Grace's side every step, asking people to investigate what exactly happened to Grace today. Afraid the phone sound would disturb Grace, he made calls in the corridor. Learning it was the young son of the Johnson family, Ethan almost smashed the phone. Notify old Master Johnson, tell him I want one of Jard Johnson's legs. Ethan hung up the phone. When he returned to the ward, Grace was gone. Ethan turned the whole hospital upside down. Grace seemed to have vanished into thin air. When Grace woke up, she was in a dark room. A young man sat in the shadows. You're awake? It was Jard. He walked from the shadow to the light, revealing that evil face. I sent a gift to Ethan. I think he will like it. Jard tied Grace to a bed. Grace didn't know what he had forced her to drink. She was weak all over, soft like a puddle of water. Although Grace was naive, no matter how stupid she was, she knew what this meant. Let go of me, Grace struggled, the chains clattering. Jard took off his clothes and turned on the camera on the side. Wait a while, and you won't say that. Jard grinned savagely, walked to the bed, and pinched Grace's waist. Get away from me, Grace said with a hard voice. However, no matter how fierce she was, right now she was just meat on the chopping block. Grace looked despairingly at the camera on the side. If this was sent to Ethan, would he still want her? Actually, Grace hadn't recovered all her memories, only remembering a little. Only now did she realize she was used by Jard, listening completely to his one-sided story without listening to Ethan's explanation. I beg you, don't, Grace cried and begged bitterly. Jard became even more excited. Ethan really found a stunner. Jard's eyes turned red, reaching out to tear Grace's clothes. Bang! Gracie, the door was kicked open by someone. Ethan rushed in seeing this scene, instantly burning with anger. He kicked Jard directly to the ground, then stomped on him fiercely twice. Then he helped put pants on Grace, wrapped her tightly in the bed sheet, and then said, "Come in." The people coming in were Ethan's men, Old Master Johnson, and several police officers. Old Master Johnson almost had a heart attack seeing Jard's naked appearance. He went up and slapped him. You dare to touch Mr. Blackwood's person? Then he quickly came to apologize to Ethan, hoping Ethan could forgive his unfilial son. Ethan sneered, kicked the video camera placed at the head of the bed, recording onto the floor. Open your eyes and look yourself doing this kind of thing. Even if it were the King of Heaven, Ethan Blackwood, will make him unable to seek life nor death. Ethan finished speaking, raised his foot, crack, and stomped that camera to pieces. Take him away. This was said to Ethan's own men. And the police were just here to act as witnesses. Grace lay softly in Ethan's arms, her face burning hot. Ethan killed Jard 1,800 times in his heart, not enough to relieve his hatred. Sorry. Ethan kissed Grace's forehead, saying softly, Gracie, Sharon's child isn't mine. Sharon and I didn't have anything happen, really just to make you angry. I thought grandfather's death was related to you. Ethan paused. Sorry, I really was too nasty, sorry. Grace was completely muddled. Unknown if she heard Ethan's words, she just pulled Ethan's collar, then kissed him deeply. Early the next morning, Ethan felt to the side and didn't touch Grace. He woke up with a start. Grace was squatting by the bed looking at Ethan. What's wrong? Grace's eyes stared at Ethan like a cat, scaring Ethan into a cold shiver for no reason. Since what Jard said is true, then forgiving you like this, isn't it a loss for me? Grace tilted her head. And I was sad for you so many times. Forgiving you easily like this, you definitely won't learn a lesson. Yes, wifey is right. Ethan listened to the teaching humbly, nodding repeatedly. You know SHT, Grace raised her hand and hit Ethan. Starting now, you have to earn my forgiveness. Otherwise, I'll go back to find Brother Xander. Hey, don't. Ethan hurriedly grabbed Grace, who pretended to leave. You say it. As long as wifey says it, I will do everything. The first thing Grace asked Ethan to do was recall every bit of when they were in love. Ethan hugged Grace and talked all night. The two seemed to return to the way they were before, sticking together like glue. The second thing was to talk about exactly how Ethan treated her after marriage. No lying, every point must be explained clearly. Grace held a coat hanger, tapping Ethan, who was squatting on the ground. Don't think of lying to me, I still have some memory. Ethan looked up carefully at Grace, stammering out those things. Grace sometimes lamented that she used to be a doctor, sometimes was angry that Sharon was too shameless. Ethan echoed Grace's words, daring not defy a bit. When talking about infuriating things, Grace would hit Ethan fiercely with the coat hanger in her hand. Hearing at the end about her miscarriage, she was so angry she walked around the room but didn't hit Ethan. Ethan Blackwood, you are too excessive. Did I provoke you or mess with you? It's enough you condone the mistress bullying the legal wife. But you even blatantly let her come to give the legal wife an abortion. Are you human? Ethan stood up and hugged the fuming Grace, walking back and forth. This matter was also a hurdle in his heart, never able to pass. Sorry, I really didn't expect her to be so vicious. Who let you get up? Grace glared at him. Continue squatting for me. Ethan smiled bitterly and obediently squatted back to the original place. You just squat here for me today. Squat all night, forget it. Grace finished speaking, threw the coat hanger, covered herself with the quilt, and went to sleep. Ethan squatted for a while, and Grace on the bed said mufflingly, "The bed is too cold, come over." Ethan was overjoyed. "Aye, coming wifey."